Greetings, my name is Slight, and I have a little bit of a long video to share with you. What you are looking at on the screen here is a document that I am planning to share with everyone on the YouTube channel and getting your feedback on. This document is a monstrosity in as far as its size is concerned, and we are going to be walking through it hopefully at a rather quick pace and kind of explaining what it is for me and what I hope that maybe it could be. This is not a campaign. I would say this is like 50% campaigning to change the game, 50% sharing my thoughts on the current state of the game. So if you want an in-depth analysis of where Gunfire Reborn is at, you will get that by the very nature of me talking about what I'd like to change about it and talking about how, in general, maybe it would be best for us to go about advocating for change in the game if that's something that we do want to see. Most people who are not super into Gunfire Reborn probably thoroughly enjoy the game. And that's not to say that I don't. I thoroughly enjoy the game. I tend to get stuck on one game at a time. When I pick a game, I usually really, really like it, and Gunfire is no exception. It does some things amazingly well. And I tend to be the type of person who gets a little bit emotionally invested in the things that I'm into. And for that reason, I have to measure some of the things that I'm disgruntled about the game with against that sort of tendency for me. So I have spent a while thinking about this topic and contemplating it and sort of sorting through where my emotions sit, and I think I've come to a pretty good place. So let's get started. First things first, this is my sort of imaginary balance patch. All right, if I had all the strings on my fingers and I could just make a balance patch, this would basically be what it looks like. All right, but there's a little bit at the beginning of this because I can't really just do that. At the beginning here, what it is a sort of letter to the developers explaining the context of why I'm going to suggest everything that I'm suggesting, and some key pieces of feedback that I think that the Gunfire Reborn developers could use, especially in their PR, public relations. I think that is one area of their current business model that struggles a lot. Is the way that they communicate what they're doing to players. I think that for a development team as involved and as willing to hear feedback as the doozy team is, I think that some real solid social skills as far as engaging with the community would really take them from like pretty good engagement to like excellent S-tier engagement. So I'm just going to read this to you. First off, there's the highlight key. That's mostly for me. And I will reiterate, this will be publicly available for you to add comments. Here's a section where you can add a comment of your name, and it will be added to this document before it goes to the developers. Recognize that if you add your name to this thing, and you don't have to, again, this should be relatively interesting without you having to get involved. I know some people are not into that, and I get that. I love your game. Gunfire has been my game for quite some time now. I'm very busy with my work as a software developer, so I only play one game at a time. It's not the best game ever made, but for me, Gunfire is my game. There's a piece of me here because my community involvement and a united interest, because of my community involvement and a united interest in seeing this game succeed. The community team is in some ways an extension of the Gunfire development team in spirit. We want to help you, and we do. We make guides, we make wikis, we answer question after question, we discuss, we test, we get other players interested in the game. It is in this context that I have written up some of my hopes for Gunfire Reborn. This document is half a love letter and half a hope for change. Know that as you listen to my criticism, that it comes clearly from a place of love and dedication. I have been working on this document for like 2 weeks now. This is the result of many, many hours of hard work, and hopefully through this change through YouTube, we can get some other people's opinions on this giant document and get it even tighter, even more effective. There are 3 important preface points. 1, how do you nerf strategies without community backlash? What is the experience that hooks players into Gunfire Reborn, and why do we need to remember that? And is it possible that the current balance direction is creating more work for the development team? Number 1, don't hide nerfs, justify them. The changes to the drop rates for Elemental Weave, Spirit Feline, and Advanced Depot were some of the most single impactful changes to high-skill players' enjoyment of Gunfire Reborn in a very long time. These changes were significantly more impactful than like even the turtle or Tau being added to the game. Seriously, my enjoyment was much better impacted by those 3 scrolls not appearing in every run than getting a new hero. Okay? Let that sink in. Huge improvement to the game. When it comes to nerfs, your team has been hurt in the past. You changed things or implemented stuff you thought was good for the game, like revive. They nerfed multiplayer, and the community backlash was really bad. And maybe it's justified, and maybe for reasons that I'm suggesting here that can be fixed. Basically, Gunfire Reborn is a great success, and they don't want to ruin it. They don't want to ruin people's fun or ruin their own reputations. Like, they've sort of caught fire with this game, you know? And for a indie game company, that's a big deal because it means that you can sort of use this game as a prototype of your success. And when you ask for funding of a variety of different things, or if you are trying to get people associated with your brand or with your development team, or you're even trying to go on to a different development team and people know like the games you've worked on, all that matters a lot. And you don't want to be known as the team who dropped the ball when they had a good situation going. That being said, if you make the game good, objectively good, then players will forgive you for nerfing something that they care about, all right? But if you give them a new path of exploration, as you take one away, they won't even have to forgive you. Okay? So there's 2 points there. One, if you know what you're doing and you do a good job at it, and then you implement that solution and it's a good thing, even if it nerfs something, people will forgive you in the long term. All right? That means you did a really good job developing. Number 2 is if you, at the same time you take something away, you give them something so that you create an exchange like, hey, we don't want you to do this. We want you to do this. I don't want you to be able to revive 50 times, but I do want you to like do these like combo fusion effects that we've added to the game. Now, granted, that has nothing to do with what I'm suggesting, but you get what I'm saying. Like there's this, we're taking away like all of your revives. Also, we're giving you this really powerful like multiplayer mechanic that's new to the game. Like that would feel worth it. Like, oh, they've exchanged revive abuse for this other mechanic. I would say the biggest mistake in the past has not been following a thoughtful approach when providing nerfs. We're going to lay out a useful template for presenting nerfs to players without hiding them in the bug fix section or saying change some drop rates of scrolls, which was my favorite change in all of Gunfire history, was a bug, if I remember correctly. No, it wasn't bug fix, it was gameplay. Change some drop rates of some scrolls. All right? You can convince players that nerfing is good for them. You really can, even if they don't like it at first. I played, so if you don't know, I was like a semi-competitive Dota player, all right? It's back in the Dota 1 stages. And I'm not going to say that I was like incredibly good or anything, but I cared a lot. I played a lot. I think I was pretty good for the time. I have seen that game go through so much changes as far as balance is concerned, and I've seen people think that they know everything about the game and be proven dead wrong 1 year later with no changes to the game. There was a dead period where Dota went through like no balance changes at all, and like people, like the meta changed over like 5 years. All right, so like when people, that's just a little aside. Anyway, if that doesn't blow your mind, it should, because 5 years, no changes to a game but a developing meta. That's interesting. Anyway, here's how you nerf things. If you this is for like when you really have something you know people are going to be upset about. All right. So, and now this would be, I'm going to rewrite this, I think, to not talk about Thunder and Glory and to talk about something like Atomic Bomb or Lightning Messenger. If we nerfed those to the ground or we made them balanced, people would cry, and I'd say that's probably pretty fair because right now those are abused to get they're like some of players' first wins in these higher reincarnation runs. So when we're doing that, when we're nerfing something that people really care about, that people really use, we're going to tell them why we nerfed it. We're going to show them the nerf. All right, we're not going to hide it. We're going to give them something in for compensation, and this is like an explanation of compensation, and then we're going to show the buffs. Okay, we're going to make an exchange. All right, we're going to say we don't like you doing this, and we think it's bad for the game, but we want you to do this, so here, try this, this should be fun. So I'm going to read this to you. We doozy have data that shows Atomic Bomb is overperforming compared to where we want blessings to be balanced at in the game. The big problem with this isn't that we don't want you to have fun killing monsters in Gunfire Reborn. It's because that having blessings this powerful actually makes it harder for the development team to add new and interesting things to the dog, because we have to balance around one overperforming blessing. We can't really we can't make grenades better, because if we make grenades better at baseline, then Atomic Bomb gets absurdly powerful. And it's already incredibly powerful. It's already super OP, but then it gets like even more. So like we can't do any buffs to almost anything in the explosion tree, anything in the grenade tree, because Atomic Bomb is too powerful. So for that reason, we're nerfing Atomic Bomb, all right? But the essential playstyle will remain the same. We are improving key areas of the dog's kit that were underperforming. So you as the player should have a host of new strategies at your fingertips. Enjoy. All right, you see how that comes off? That comes off like, hey, we're doing this thing we know you don't like, and we're going to make it as easy on you as possible. All right? Then you would say Atomic Bomb, it has its consumption reverted. All right, so if you trigger Atomic Bomb, it throws all your grenades. All right, that would be a good balance change for Atomic Bomb. This change still lets you use Atomic Bomb and to a powerful effect, but you actually have to sort of like think while you're using the build now, and you can't just like spam infinite grenades and then like hope for like 3 triggers in a row on a boss and instantly kill him. You will actually have to engage with the game of Gunfire Reborn. But so yeah, we're saying that, and then we're saying like, okay, we're gonna buff. You know, you're gonna get 3 times more regen during dual wield innately. The base health of the character is increased by 20. You know, there's certain key bad ascensions like Ember Eruption that we're improving a lot. And we are changing the way that Sharpshooter and Unleash Potential work and making them better overall and make a little bit more sense. You know, that's the type of stuff that if I'm reading that patch, I'm like, yes, yes. And I mean, like, now I'm of the opinion that I don't like Atomic Bomb, but even if I was the type of player that like only could win with Atomic Bomb, I probably also know a little bit about the character and think like, oh, dog sucks unless I use Atomic Bomb. So when I hear that I'm getting buffs and things are being fixed that I want to that like so that I can do other things that are not going to, they're not going to be quite as hard, you know, I get excited, specifically excited. So this is how you present bad information. You don't hide. You acknowledge your decision bravely. You give the players a benefit for accepting your decision to nerf something they like. This community engagement strategy will powerfully improve your ability to steer the game in the direction that the Gunfire developers want, instead of simply responding to community feedback over and over and over again. You, as Gunfire Reborn developers, can withstand negative feedback, and you will be rewarded for it if you commit to making the game better, and, of course, continue to listen to feedback, as you do, which you do amazing at. All right, so number 2, what hooks players and why does it matter? Now, both of these have been significantly reduced. I might expand them out. Not sure how I feel. But one thing we want to keep in mind is that everyone who's played Gunfire Reborn has played the first 30 hours of it, assuming they've played more than 30 hours, right? And the first 30 hours are gruelingly difficult. I mean, I have hundreds of hours in this game, and it is really tense as to whether or not I'm going to be able to beat my first run on a new fresh file. It is that hard, all right? And I know this game. I don't know everything about it. There are people who know the game better than I do, but I know this game pretty well. And I get whooped on my first run, like hands down. Now, part of that's because of the talent tree, but part of it, you know, new players like really struggle. I mean, I cannot imagine. I don't know how many games it took me, because this is my first FPS game that I've ever gotten into, but it took me a lot of games before I beat normal. I mean, it was a lot of games. The ship boss is incredibly hard. And beating Nightmare was hard back in the day because you didn't have a lot of the talents that you have now. Nightmare got easy when the talent tree got revamped and a bunch of like really, really incredibly powerful talents got added to the talent tree, which we're going to talk about here in just a bit. But we need to keep in mind that the thing that hooked players was a gruelingly difficult 30 hours. And when we get to the end game and we're no longer being pushed to like we're being given everything like a Gemini, we're being given like clear build paths through blessings. We are, there are certain builds that are easy to do that are basically handed to us on a silver platter that like trivialize the R7 and R8 content. Like this is totally disconnected from those first 30 hours that really hooked people in. Like the end game right now is so far removed from the experience that new players have and that really gets them into Gunfire Reborn that there's a problem here. And so we have to make sure that because your game is successful, that is an indication that the beginning and progression that happens in the beginning of the game is very, very successful. And so we need to, while we can't capture the progression, we can capture the feeling of like having limited options and having to adapt to every run and it being difficult and scary. All right, scary. I remember my first games, and I've played a fresh file to all the way to R7 before the 1.0 patch came out. It's terrifying, especially those first like 20 runs. Whew, they're scary stuff. All right, point number 3. Is more difficulties a valid long-term strategy? I'm going to say no, all right? And the reason is because I'm going to say adding like the ability to effectively nerf to your lists of skills as a dev team will serve you much better in the long run. It is much, much, much more work to add more difficulties than it is to balance the current difficulties. Higher difficulties just makes the current issues with R8 and R7 worse. And those issues are that the most OP strategies will be the only ones which are viable. So as you add difficulties to the game, the build diversity gets lower and lower and lower and less fun. And so if we, sorry about hitting the mic. And so we fundamentally need, I suggest, and I'm not a game developer, so, and I had, all of my game design knowledge is sort of cursory or GDC, talks, that kind of stuff. So, I've never even taken a course in game development. I have, I am what they call a couch game designer. I have a game that I've designed that's getting closer to done, but it's like a card game. That being said, so, take this all with a caveat, but what I would suggest is that it will serve you to be able to nerf things and to be able to balance what you already have built instead of having to build more stuff and then rebalance everything to work in that higher difficulty rating. That has to be more work, all right? Or if it's not more work, it's not going to be very good. All right, so let's move on to the general objectives of this particular document. Number 1, all included changes have as little development as possible. What that means is that all the changes that I've included in this document have very, very little like actual new development that would be necessary. So what I've done is I've gone through and tried to tweak numbers. What I think of as configuration when I'm thinking of a change, where someone can go in, the number is literally already coded in for the weapon, the inscription, or we're not developing a whole lot of new stuff, but we are using the current framework that's working so well and just tweaking everything in the game to be just a little bit more in balance with each other. We're making the weak things better, the OP things just a little worse, and we're using what's already put in place to do that instead of sort of like developing a whole bunch of new stuff. So everything that requires what I think is at least a little bit of development, any at all, like if I change a scroll from not having Lucky Shot to having Lucky Shot, that's development, okay? Because that's not just something where they can go in and change a number. All right, so I have tried to reduce even that to as little as possible. Because I get it. Anyway, increase difficulty options for higher reincarnation levels. All right, this is important. Options is underlined. All right, what I think that I've had a mistake in the past about is like assuming that the way that I play Gunfire Reborn is the best way to play Gunfire Reborn. And I can't deny, let me take a drink, that I personally like the way that I play a lot. And that that's the reason I play this way. But not everyone plays the same way. Not everyone really likes a really difficult challenge. But I really do. And so what I want to be able to do is have the option to make the game more or less difficult in a couple key ways that are pretty accessible, so that I can control where my difficulty is at and really push myself and continue to grow as a player. Right now, R8 caps off too easy with a lot of the current builds, and there are some strategies that are just not viable in R8 just because of what I think some people call stat bloat, which is that the Gunfire developers have created difficulty by increasing HP and these sort of raw stats of enemies to a very high amount. And so this makes anything that does percentage HP damage extremely powerful, and anything that doesn't do that is very weak. And so, yeah, so there's this stat bloat. R8 is still pretty easy considering all the options that the game gives you to combat it. We want more options, and this doesn't mean just make the game harder. This could mean make the game easier as well. If you want a more casual experience, especially if all this stuff gets changed, you might want a more casual experience because the end game should actually be hard as opposed to very easy to abuse. All right. Next, number 3 is increase build flexibility. By making the weaker stuff more powerful and the OP stuff less powerful, what we do is we level the playing field. Not completely, and we're not taking out epic OP stuff. We're not removing the fun. I want the fun. I want to be completely busted some runs, okay? But I also want to use more than 7 weapons in the game, all right? And that's an exaggeration. But currently it is very rare. I just did a video about Tiger Cannon, and the Tiger Cannon was incredibly powerful, and it's still, it was the best Tiger Cannon I've ever seen, ever used, all right? On, the best hero with the best Ascensions for it, okay? And I still couldn't beat the DPS check phase on the bear. This is the best that it can get, ever, in hundreds of hours of gameplay, and it still doesn't beat the DPS check. That's a balance problem, okay? And that's where this flexibility comes in, because what that means is if the Tiger Cannon won't work in its best case scenario, it never works in any other scenario, right? Especially in high RX and especially in solo. If you're bringing in multiplayer in here, recognize that multiplayer is about 3 to 4 times easier than solo, and that there's a lot of things that punish you a lot more in solo than they do in multiplayer. Number 4 is nerf overpowered blessings. Most of these are hero power blessings. What I would like to balance the game around is Copycat. Copycat is a powerful, useful, and functional reincarnation blessing that is probably one of the best, if not the best, probably one of the best neutral blessings that you can take. All right, it's effective the entire run. It has powerful effects. It's a little bit unwieldy, it's hard to really control and to know what buffs you're getting. But I would say that that's a balanced R8 blessing. All right, balanced. Battle Scarred, not balanced. Makes you invulnerable from the very start of the game almost to the end. All right, I mean you are incredibly hard to kill on the dog with Battle Scarred. Unstoppable Momentum, which used to be pretty good, is now incredibly ridiculous with a 50% reset. It is absurdly broken. The new Splinter Orb basically can infinitely, with 1 or 2 levels of Energy Echo, I think, you can basically you don't even need levels of Power Source, which gives you more orbs, right? Because you could just keep casting Energy Orb over and over and over again. These blessings are overpowered. You don't need this much power in a blessing. And really what it does is it actually significantly reduces all of the flexibility out of build, and you play in one way every time you take the blessing. All right. Instead of it being an accent to your build, it becomes your build and sort of funnels you down this single path. And now no longer do you have the exploration of a complex game state. You have the abuse of a single powerful blessing, and that there sort of nothing else exists. And if you say, if you want to make the argument that, well, you could just avoid the blessings. Yeah, you can, but the blessings are the cool stuff. Like when I play Reincarnation, I want to have Splinter Orb without the cooldown, because the Splinter Orb without the cooldown is balanced and interesting and actually is an accent to my gameplay. Unstoppable Momentum before the buff was interesting and fun and powerful and good enough to beat R8 with already. Good enough to beat R8 with already, and I've proved it. I did a over-explain on it right before they buffed it into the stratosphere. So we're going to nerf those down, and the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to bring everything up at the same time. We're going to buff all the heroes. We're going to buff almost all of the weapons so that we don't need this to get through R8 anymore, because everything's going to get a little better. We're going to keep Elemental Weave, Spirit Feline, and Advanced Depot untouched so people don't cry about it. And they can abuse these if they want, and I can avoid them if I want to. And because this is one of those like danger areas, like, you know, just give people these. You know, it's fun to have like completely broken stuff in the game. These are the completely broken things. And if it's just 3 things, I can avoid them. I really can. It's not a big deal. Number 6 is a big one for me, and there's a lot of work that went into this, but make rarities match up better with the power level of scrolls and inscriptions. Right now, new players don't really get a very consistent amount of information about what it is they're seeing in the game. So when I see, sorry, there's a noise. Hold on one sec. Oh no. I don't know. Anyway, new players see the rarities of scrolls and they make no sense. You know, there are normal inscriptions that are more powerful than some uniques. And that's rare, but there are especially exclusives. There are rare inscriptions that are absolute trash, truly very bad. And some normal scrolls are as good as legendaries, and some rare scrolls are like worse than normal scrolls, the average normal scroll. So, taking a fresh coat of paint to all of that is going to benefit everyone. And it actually gives the developers a lot more room to balance, because now if you say like, hey, I want to increase, like I want more normal scrolls and less rares and legendaries. All right. Well, right now, if you do that, then every game has Brief Respite, Against the Flow, and Elemental Power. Every single game that you play is going to have those 3 incredibly powerful scrolls in them, and so that's all you're going to play with is those like completely busted stuff. So like that's the issue. All right, it really limits the design space when you don't balance your game, and it reduces complexity of the actual game state. Sweet. Okay, we can actually move on to changes now. You have stuck with me here for who knows how long. Let's check. Already 30 minutes. We haven't even gotten into the changes yet. You. Gameplay changes. All right, so first things first, and I will use this as needed, the wiki here, but I'll see if I need to bring it up. Mostly this is for people who know the game a bit better. So if you're kind of new, this is going to be tough for you. I'm sorry. All right. Add an option to the settings to have the elemental fusion effect scale down as you increase in reincarnation. All right, miasma from 12% max HP per second to 7% max HP per second. So that's a little bit more than half, and those changes are reflected in the elite and boss damage as well. This is an option that you can set, but basically this would provide a much more cohesive and effective place for miasma to sit. I think this still might be a little too strong, but I'd prefer not to over nerf it, because then in the future, if this still turns out to be very powerful, we can always just tweak it down just a little bit more. Combustion, at first I wasn't going to nerf this, but actually, like if you know what you're doing with combustion, the damage increase is insane. Same for manipulation. Both of these deserve these nerf downs at the highest levels of reincarnation. Combustion is incredibly powerful if you know how to really increase your chance on shot to be very high, a high percentage of it inflicting the combustion effect. This is a multiplicative increase, so if I have a overall 50% chance to apply an elemental effect on each shot, that means I'm getting a, on average, 100% multiplicative increase from combustion. That would be reduced to 75% multiplicative increase at R8, which I think is a little bit more balanced. Manipulation is probably the best defensive tool in the game if you can consistently apply manipulation, and reducing the duration of that is probably very much worth it. Manipulation has this weird effect where it makes you do no damage, really. You don't do a lot of damage, but also like nothing kills you, really. Probably one of the most boring mechanics for that reason, and definitely deserves a nerf. Manipulation is sort of broken when you get into a tri-element of stuff. So, you know, honestly, I think that even 3 seconds might be a little too high, but once again, I don't want to over nerf it. Add in options in the settings where you can set a specific weapon to always appear in the starting weapon chest. I will never use this, but maybe if I wanted to test something out or show something, that'd be kind of nice. Same thing with the blessings. You can just, like in the settings, you could just choose one blessing that you'll see in that starting blessing, so you don't have to sort of re-roll a bunch. But then in multiplayer, you do get the nerf, I guess. Well, actually, you could use this for multiplayer, so never mind. Add an option in the settings that adds 1 second to your dash cooldown. So this is kind of cool. Like, my assumption is like that the Gunfire developers, if they do a DLC, will do something like the Hades. I don't know the name. I never played Hades very much. I think I beat the final boss once, but they have like a heat system or something where you can sort of like add all these modifiers to the game. And so like this is like an example of that would have a significant impact on your power level, and be like not too bad. Next up, the last difficulty option that I'm suggesting, and notice that all this is development work. So hopefully we're going to see these pink tags decrease as time goes on, but recognize that these are not difficult things to implement. Nothing that I'm suggesting is like a complete rework from the ground up, you know, and I'm avoiding those things very specifically because I feel like the bones of the game is in a good place. We just need to tweak it into you know, where it needs to be, right? New toggle for multiplayer. If you're doing a multiplayer match, you can toggle on hard mode, all right? And this would be publicly available so that everyone would see you're playing hard mode. It sets the maximum revives for any player to 4, and only one of these can be a self-revive. And you may only share 4 scrolls or weapons total each game, and only during pre-boss rooms. So you can't share a scroll or weapon unless it's the pre-boss room, all right? Which means that if you find something someone wants, you have to hold on to it, which is sort of a nerf in itself. All right, but this I think would give us a fresh coat of paint on what it feels like to play multiplayer, and would reduce and would give players the option to make it hard without enforcing them to make the game as hard as that the developers or maybe I would like it to be. Other changes, and obviously this can get more and more in depth, but I think these are some of the core things that people would actually like. That would be pretty easy to implement. They don't have to be anything special. They can be in the settings area, but they would significantly improve the fun of the game. Other changes. Weapon upgrades increase past 600 at plus 25 per level above level 5. So this is a nerf. Basically, most runs that I play in R8, I end up like 4,000 gold. Okay, so one thing this does is like actually spends my gold, which is great. All right, because I don't like ending the run with 4,000 gold. It makes it feels bad. Feels bad, man. The other thing it does is makes things that give you gold more useful, because now you will actually run out of gold. So like a level 10 weapon will cost 725 to upgrade. It's a significant increase that adds up over time. All right. The next one is a big nerf that I think is really well deserved. Etching a Gemini can only happen on weapons that are plus 7. Currently, the way that the game works is as long as you have a weapon that's plus 5, you can etch a Gemini. So this causes you to have to spend another 1,200 gold in upgrades, and then even more to etch. So it is an incredibly expensive undertaking to find a weapon early and pump it up to get an early etch, or to get an early Gemini. And early Geminiing in this game is obscenely busted and really should be tried to be reduced as much as possible. But in the case where you have gobs of gold because you have an interesting build, being able to get this early probably is worth it, and would be really cool because it's so rare that you get it. Right now I can get a Gemini before the first boss sometimes. And weapons with 4 inscriptions no longer automatically etch a Gemini. All right, so that's just completely removed. If you have 4 inscriptions on a level 5 weapon, you etch it. you just got a 5th normal inscription. All right, that seems fine and fair. You should have to wait to be able to get that Gemini. And that was fun. Back before you had the Supreme Craftsman talent. Let's go look at that. Here, I can pull this one up. I'm so fast. It's a legendary craftsman here. Yeah, this one here. Am I recording? Yeah, I am. Okay, cool. Let's make sure. Okay, yeah, we're good. Yeah, this one allows you to etch stuff. So like before this existed, before you could just etch a Gemini, like really early in the game, you like had to find Geminis. And it was cool because like when you finally got a Gemini, it was like meaningful and unique and felt interesting as opposed to you just being guaranteed to get one every single run. Next up, skill damage increases are now 50% more effective at increasing explosion damage. So if you didn't know, explosion damage is increased by skill damage and weapon damage. It's intended to make up for the fact that explosion weapons can't crit. So we're just significantly increasing the effectiveness of skill damage on explosion damage so that it stays a bit more relevant. Number 11, enemies cannot have multiple stacks of damage dealt reduction. So this isn't damage mitigation. This is the reduction of the damage that they would do to the player. So stuff like Cursed Mark with Tau, which makes enemies do reduced damage. Hex Smoke makes enemies do reduced damage. These things no longer stack with each other, all right? Only the highest value of damage reduction is active at once. This is specifically for multiplayer. I really don't think this comes into play almost ever in solo play, but splitting these out and making it sure that damage reduction can't stack will keep multiplayer fresh and not allow you to use like some cheap combos with Tau and the Turtle has it as well. You know, this I think is a good healthy spot for multiplayer to be in. You really shouldn't be able to reduce enemy damage down to nothing, all right? Especially with the very low cost to do so. With all these changes, these are all nerfs. A lot of these are nerfs so far. We're also reducing the HP scaling in Reincarnation 7 and 8. All right, so we are nerfing things across the board, but we're also making Reincarnation 7 and 8 just a little easier. So not as much stat bloat. Everything should be a little bit easier to be able to kill. And stuff that does like percent HP damage won't be as powerful now because their actual HP won't be so high. Last thing here on the gameplay changes is the defensive enemy enhancement. Weapons that cannot naturally crit will only have their damage reduced by 10, 15, and 20% instead of 40, 50, and 60%. Currently, the defensive enemy enhancement strongly favors any weapon that can crit. And weapons that cannot crit, it is incredibly powerful against, all right? Those weapons can't crit and shouldn't be punished for that. Especially not at a 60% damage reduction. That is obscene. So reducing this to 20%, which is more reasonable, is a good thing and a healthy spot for a lot of AoE explosion non-critting weapons to be in, especially swords. This is a huge problem in R7 and R8 because there are so many defensive enemies that they significantly reduce the viability of swords and explosion weapons. Talent tree changes. The Bounty Hunter talent. Ooh, look, we can just... Bounty Hunter says obtain 3 copper upon dealing a crit hit. Now weapons that cannot crit will just give 3 gold on their first hit. You can't get this +3 twice from critting and hitting. You can just get it one time, but now weapons that can't crit will also give you this gold. This adds up to quite a bit of gold over the course of the game. Next up is Battlefield support. Let's see if I can... There we go. Battlefield support is a powerful, one of the best talents on the talent tree, and it gives secondary skill when you consume specific amounts of ammo. That being said, it heavily favors fast-firing weapons to the point of insanity. So we're scaling down the amount of large and special ammo needed to get extra, to get an extra secondary charge. All right, before we were at 40, 20, 10 at max level, and that would bring us down to, that would actually be a nerf for fast firing weapons and a buff for, a slight buff for large ammo and a large buff for special ammo. Man, that took me a lot to say. Anyway, slight nerf for normal ammo, slight buff for large ammo, significant buff for special ammo. Currently, shooting 10 rounds of special ammo can take like 30 seconds. Like, it really can. It can take 30 seconds. You know, that is a long time to get one charge of a secondary. I still don't know if this is quite enough. I don't know if this is quite balanced, but this would be a much better place for this very, very powerful talent to be. Next up is the Breacher talent, which I think is like has the best effect for swords with the incredible move speed it gives, but the other two are kind of weak. So we're changing the launcher reload speed from scaling from 5 to 25% to 8 to 40%. So that's a 15% add from at max level. I think this will be a significant increase to launcher power level without being too overpowered, and it'll make launchers feel a lot easier to use. And I think that's a good thing. Also, the sniper crit X that it gives is laughably weak at 0.25 crit X. Keep in mind that snipers already have high crit X. So like giving them more crit X is actually like terrible. Like going from 4x crit X to 4.25 crit X is a laughably small damage increase. Laughably small. So we're doubling it and it's still not enough, but at least it's a slight increase. All right, that's the Breacher talent. Let's at least get it on the screen here. Yeah. Launchers crit X 0.25. That's so bad. Whoever decided to do that doesn't really understand how crit adds up together, I don't think. Didn't really have a good understanding. All right, next we're getting into spicy territory. Let me take a drink. My assumption is that this will be very controversial. Okay? Overall, we're going to nerf most hero-specific blessings to be more fun, interesting, and challenging to use as opposed to OP and easy to use. These blessings are meant to be balanced around R8 specifically, and we are buffing the weak non-hero specific blessings. First up is the cat. Smog-bound zone. Let's get here. Let me move to this in the wiki. Okay, I'm just gonna prime your brain. All right. Remember, we're buffing a lot of stuff. Okay, we already buffed all of Reincarnation 7 and 8 by reducing the HP scaling. Okay, and enemies will have like 15% less HP. That is not an insignificant amount. That is a lot of HP reduction. All right. First things first. Oh, it's not listed here, but I'm going to add this. Splinter Orb, the cooldown reduction for each enemy hit should be either removed or changed to like 0.25 seconds. So I'll add that in. Smog-bound zone, we are just removing this duration increase, okay? We're still getting the area, which is very powerful, and the damage reduction, which is extremely powerful, especially in teammates. The duration is the dangerous part because especially before a couple patches ago, smoke grenades didn't stack on top of each other. If you had one in an area, they only took damage from one smoke grenade, and that's not the case anymore. So with a couple levels in smoke grenade damage or acidic explosion, smog-bound zone gets ridiculous. And most of it has to do with this duration. It doesn't need this duration, and it's extremely powerful without it. So let's remove that. Next up is Elemental Maestro. Before, it gave you a buff for 4 seconds. Every 10 seconds, that gave you 100% elemental damage and guaranteed all elemental effects during the buff, which is absurdly powerful. Incredibly powerful. So we're removing that guaranteed effect chance right out. That will no longer happen. But now what it does is every 10 seconds, your next hit, one hit, all right, will guarantee a random elemental effect, and you will get plus 100% elemental damage for 4 seconds. Okay? It's just one hit. All right? So this is still extremely powerful. It benefits you to play in a very similar way. It essentially kind of does the same thing. It's just not quite as absolutely broken as Elemental Maestro is, because that is absolutely absurd. All right, up next we've got Albi the dog. All right, Albi, I think, is the classic example of a character who has blessings that are way too powerful, but needs his base kit buffed to compensate for the fact that, oops, to compensate for the fact that his blessings don't need to be that powerful, and you should be able to play this character in a way that doesn't actually have to have blessings. Let me get back down to where I was. All right, so Atomic Bomb now consumes all grenades when thrown. This was the way that it originally worked, but in the past, it didn't have this damage increase for 1 second that was stackable. So this is still an overall buff to what Atomic Bomb used to be. It's just not buffed into the stratosphere. Weapon Genius, minus 50% dual wield cooldown is already an incredibly powerful blessing, and all other benefits are just take it way over the top. The main benefit to having Weapon Genius is to abuse the like the sharpshooter cooldown reset with golden comeback, so you can kind of like perpetually keep stacks of damage reduction, and that works very well and is worth getting. But 75% lucky shot and a potential 12,000 gold advantage on your offhand in the late game is just a little bit too much, and makes the game very, very easy, much too easy. Dog by far is the easiest character to beat R8 on, and those are because his blessings are incredibly overpowered. Battle Scarred, instead of healing up to 75% HP, we're only going to heal up to 50%, and our damage reduction max is going to stay at 50%, stay to 30% instead of 50%. So this is a significant nerf. This is a blessing that basically makes you invulnerable. This might not be enough. It still might be the best or most consistent blessing on the dog for solo, but this will put it in a much better position. Lastly, we've got One Dog Army. We're going to reduce the weapon and skill damage from 150 to 100%, which is still extremely strong. And now the damage reduction and healing is only active during dual wield instead of when dual wield is inactive. This is the most like of a change, less than a nerf, and does require a little bit of development because we have to change some functionality the way that it works. But the reason that I'm not doing the healing and damage reduction while you have the while you don't have dual wield is currently One Dog Army like totally removes any need for using dual wield. So this change makes you like still fits with the idea of One Dog Army. It means that you can sort of use one weapon to great effect for damage, and you can still do everything you did before, but now you can use dual wield to heal and to like actually defend yourself, and it like sort of flips the narrative of how the dog works and is still very interesting. So I think this is a good spot for this, and is a much more interesting way to play the dog than just to not use your skill the entire game. Next up, we have the bird. Let me get down to him. First up, Unstoppable Momentum. This didn't used to have this 5% chance to reset the cooldown of leap per stack, and it is obscenely broken now that it has that. So we're just going to remove that percent chance to reset the cooldown. It was in a really good spot before. In fact, it might be a little too strong still, even with removing this, if you know actually how to play the character and the build. But this will get it back in line to a usable but not completely broken blessing. Oppressor is a very powerful blessing and does kind of everything that you would want in a blessing. It just makes you better at what you're already doing. We're just knocking down the damage from 150 to 100 and the damage reduction from 30 to 20. Not a huge nerf. So this is still essentially does the same thing and should be still very powerful. Next up is Lay Low. Thunder and Glory just got a recent buff that made it really overpowered. The base damage of this gets up to like 1,200 base damage increase, which is multiplicative with Fulminous Zap as a base damage increase. So it's absolutely absurd. So we're just having the benefit from the Thunder and Glory base damage increase, so that it's just not quite so oppressive and so easy to do. This still is probably not enough, mostly because Fulminous Zap is multiplicative with this base damage. But after having the damage, it might be okay to see where this is at and see, what this actually feels like. I have a sense it would still be a little too overpowered, but at least it wouldn't be so disgusting. I thought Thunder and Glory was already pretty good at 50% fatal cooldown reduction. That was already worth picking up. So giving it this absurd stack, it doesn't make any sense. It's just it's just very obscene. The amount of power this gives to the blessing. It's not very fun. You know, it's fun one time and that's it. Next up, we're going to look at Lightning Messenger. Lightning Messenger is probably maybe the most powerful blessing in the game. It is extremely powerful. Being able to easily... well, let me crack this soda real quick. Oh, look at that foresight. Muted the mic. Being able to easily set up a tri-element build is not to be underestimated in the least. And to be able to immediately being able to apply fusion effects in the form of manipulation or miasma is absurdly powerful. So the change to this reduces the shock effect on crits from 100% to 20%, which is still incredibly powerful. It removes all AoE shock application, and this already works this way, but it won't reapply shock on a shock target. So it already works that way, but that's still worth it. Even under these pretenses, this would be a incredibly powerful blessing, and that just goes to show you how obscenely overpowered it's been for so long. I'm not suggesting any changes to high-powered arc right now. In my testing in R8, it's been pretty balanced. It's really strong, but I haven't seen it just be absolutely absurd. So I felt like high-powered arc is actually in a pretty good spot. All right, next up is Tau, which has the first buff to any hero-specific blessing. Thorny Bloom deals skill damage to the enemy when the mark of Fatal Bloom vanishes, and is equal to the amount of additional damage triggered within the mark duration times the base damage. So it tends not to be very strong. Usually, like to get effect out of this, you have to be like reapplying Fatal Bloom. But if you're doing Fatal Bloom trigger builds, you just want Blossom Enthusiast, because Blossom Enthusiast is like 10, 15 times better. So I have retooled Thorny Bloom with a little development to be a little bit better for the Blade of Bloom build. So now on whenever the Fatal Bloom vanishes, it'll do the number of blooms plus 2 times the bloom base damage. So you're sort of getting, like, for every time you cast, when you cast Fatal Bloom the first time, you just get the initial damage trigger. Then the second time you cast, it removes the previous and adds another. So it's going to do 2 instances of Fatal Bloom damage from Thorny Bloom and then apply it again. And I think that's going to put it in a much better spot and be a lot more useful with the Blade of Bloom build without being like too overpowered. Sword Mastery. And if I was going to give it the gunfire treatment, I would, just add 8. Add 8 here, right? That's like the level of that's like the Thunder and Glory treatment. It would be like add 8 here, okay? Sword Mastery. Rate of fire from 50% to 20%. I do like the change to add a little bit to the Sword Mastery, but 50% rate of fire with a pretty much near 100% uptime with a lot of different builds is a little too powerful. This was already good in the Swords Out defensive build, and it was already good to have this. We didn't need more, but a little more wouldn't hurt. Ice Blade is by far the most oppressive and OP Ascension on her. And we are having its viability. It still does 5% current HP, which means it scales. It's still incredibly powerful and probably necessary to do R8 builds that are Blade of Bloom or damaging Swords Out builds. But this is a much more reasonable spot to be in. Still might be a little too powerful, hard to tell. Then we have Blossom Enthusiast. Blossom Enthusiast is an incredibly powerful blessing. We are reducing it from -8 hits to -5 hits. And that might still also be a little bit too powerful. Players who really know how to abuse this can do obscene stuff. Like, you don't need -8. Like, -5 would still be enough to like crush R8. And that's kind of where we'd prefer to be. If you really know what you're doing, you should be able to crush R8, but you shouldn't be able to trivialize it. So Blossom Enthusiast should do a little bit better job at what it's supposed to do without just getting totally absurd. All right, next one. Despite having, I think, the best kit in the game, the turtle doesn't have the best blessings. They're not quite so oppressive as some of the other characters. Dominating Fist, we're just going to reduce from 20 to 12. It's still a very nice upgrade. It's still going to make those punch builds that much stronger. You know, I think already Skill Freak is probably a little bit more consistent to pick than Dominating Fist, but Dominating Fist does more things than Skill Freak does. So Dominating Fist is more of a flexible pick than that is. Libra Warrior is really good, a little bit overpowered, probably the most overpowered one, maybe. Backfire is really strong too, but we're just reducing this. Instead of giving you 100% of the bonus to Striking Punch, we're just reducing this to 50% of the bonus to Striking Punch. Should still be really good, especially for a hybrid build. And lastly here, Backfire, we're just removing the hurdle AoE damage. Backfire actually works quite well. You may not know exactly how to take great advantage of it, but Backfire works all the time, even if you don't have your shield up. And removing the hurdle spam for Backfire, I think would put this in a pretty good spot. You know, playing a tanky frontliner with Backfire is actually really strong. And reflecting a multiplied 60 damage attack in a giant AoE is not to be understated. And taking a couple hits with some damage reduction makes Backfire do a lot of damage and not put you in quite a bad spot. The turtle has plenty of ways to keep himself alive. So like you can actually take a couple hits of damage and not be too worn out. So I don't think we need this huge AoE hurdle damage for Backfire to be good. Hurdle already is incredibly powerful. All right, that concludes all the heroes. How did you feel about that? I don't know, but remember, we're buffing everything. So yes, that's a lot of nerfs, but instead of being run defining, now they will be run accenting, which is going to feel a lot better to play. Okay, so let's talk about some buffs. All right, we are going to talk about the normal blessings. All right, these ones are available to everyone. Our goal here is to make these on par, every single one of them on par in a legitimate option as compared to the hero-specific ones, so that we actually have legitimate options and we're not forced to pick in the hero ones every time. All right, first up is a little bit of a unique one, Eye of Providence. I don't think this is very powerful, but what I've done is reduce the cost to 0. All right, and increase essence pickups by 20%. I've done this because this gives players who are new to reincarnation a option as far as picking a picking a blessing without actually losing their essence. This will actually overall increase essence pickups. It gives you a very marginal benefit, but it doesn't cost you any essence to do so. And for that reason, this is a perfect option for people who just broke into Reincarnation 1. They need to keep leveling up their talent tree, but they don't have essence to spare. And so this one is something that they can get, and they can get a marginal benefit from it. Fake Death is now 0 cost instead of 30, but it now has text indicating that the revive will cost essence. I think this is already very powerful. It already is expensive based on what level of difficulty you're beating, so I think that's fine. Jackpot is incredibly good and much better than its 30 cost would suggest. It has a chance to give you 4,000 copper, a 25% chance because of the talent tree, and all copper gained is increased by 50%. Jackpot often does exactly what Craftsman Inheritor does with no downside. It's that powerful. So Jackpot deserves to cost 120. It's already very good. Steady Profit, on the other hand, is quite bad. Let me get to it. We're right here. Upon gaining or consuming soul essence, obtain double the amount as copper. So we are taking that from double to triple. And we are also increasing the essence pickups by 20%. This is another one that people can take when they are leveling their character still. It gives a marginal benefit, but it increases your essence pickups. So that is something that you can use to actually farm essence faster. All right. Next up, Endless Assault. This is an overall quite weak Ascension. It's very rare that you're playing a character that's going to benefit from the amount of secondary skills they have, because almost every character has at least one Ascension that already gives you like more secondary charges than you could ever use, so the only person that this is not the case on is like Atomic Bomb Dog, right? So what we've done is made this really good and just give a huge amount of secondary skills. So if we're going to do it, just give them a lot of secondary skills and also give plus 50% skill damage. Little buff, a little bit better. I think that this would find some use actually with Kyansui, excuse me, Tiansui, the turtle, because he can run out of secondary skills really easily if he gets an early wave-breaking blow. Next up is Supreme Craftsman. All right, I'm going to buff this so that the first time you re-roll on any craftsman is free, and then the subsequent rolls cost money. Spending an entire blessing on this doesn't feel very good right now, so giving the first roll free I think would help a lot with this blessing and make it a little bit more useful. Occult Booster is incredibly powerful. The 20% chance to get an extremely powerful scroll should not be understated, and for that reason it should cost 150. Royal Guard is getting a slight increase, and all this is doing is just in guaranteeing that if this elite, when this elite spawns, it will always drop a goblet. Just a slight buff. It's very cheap, so this is something that players who are leveling up can go for. And it gives them an opportunity to get better at fighting elites. Next up is Ultimate Firearm. Ultimate Firearm really needs to be a high % chance to be useful because it's only weapon drops. It's not the weapons you find in peddlers, and you find way more weapons in peddlers than you find anywhere else. So for that reason, we're buffing it to a 75% and increasing the cost. Overconsumption is actually quite a powerful blessing here. I like it quite a bit, but it scales down a little too quickly. Excuse me. So we are having the effect that Ascensions have on reducing its damage. So before, if you had 15 Ascensions, you would be no longer getting any benefit from overconsumption. We are having that, so it costs... Excuse me. You need 30 Ascensions to reduce the weapon and skill damage to 0. And realistically, you're not going to have 30 Ascensions, but you will have a combination of Ascensions and scrolls. And my hope is that like you kind of run out at near the end of the game, as opposed to like halfway through the Angsty Desert, right? I think that would be a little bit better balance for this because you're losing power the whole run, right? But we don't need you to have no power like halfway through the second stage. That's a little too quick. Ultimate Gambler is probably the best. Yeah, it is the best non-hero specific blessing, and it is extremely powerful. So we're going to nerf it, and it's going to be through some development. The cost is increasing to 150, and now, in line with the flavor of the blessing, rerolling your goblet costs 100 gold, and the cost is increased by 100 for each reroll. So this does nerf it significantly, but Ultimate Gambler is incredibly powerful and should not be underrated. There are certain characters or certain builds that would prefer this above almost anything else, even with the nerf. So having this cost a little gold, you know, if you have to reroll 5 times in a game, you know, that's like 2,000-ish, like 1,500 gold. You know, it's nothing crazy, but it is a slight nerf. Skill Freak, we're increasing the cost to 120 because of how powerful it is. It is a 100% multiplicative damage boost, and when it's picked right, it does incredible damage. Painkiller now makes elemental effects last twice as long on you, so this effect is much more powerful, and the cost is increased to 120. And Copycat now costs 150. I would say that this is also probably either tied to or close to second best normal blessing that you can get on any character. So that covers all of my suggested reincarnation blessing balance changes. Hopefully that was interesting, and hopefully you think that those would be in line with your expectations. And now let's keep those in context as we move on to the Hero Ascension Balance changes. All right, so the first changed suggestion on the cat is gonna just hurt. It's gonna hurt, all right? Just be ready, all right? First thing, Smoke Grenade. Decay effect from 100% chance to 40%, and base damage increased by 30%, all right? Okay? All right, look, it's gonna be okay, okay? The cat has gone too long being able to guarantee the decay effect at no cost to it itself, and basically guaranteeing all these absurd elemental synergies. 40% chance is still incredible. Keep in mind, you can stack smoke grenades on the same spot. So that means you can just throw 3 at people's feet, and then each one ticks, all right? And 40% of the time that tick applies the decay effect. That's incredibly powerful, okay? And we're increasing the base damage so that these can actually do a little bit of damage without you having to cheese the smog-bound zone duration increase. So now this should just actually do a little bit more damage and hopefully will be a more viable strategy for actually doing smoke grenade damage builds. The energy charge talent, which recovers shield for each enemy hit with energy orb, is being increased from 5 to 7%. This should be a significant bonus to your survivability on the cat. Instead of relying on just slowing enemies down, hopefully the energy charge talent will give you a bit more of an ability to actually outplay the enemies. And if you hit 3 or 4 enemies with one energy orb, you're looking at gaining a considerable amount of shield from that. Next, because we want to nerf Splinter Orb a little bit. Splinter Orb has a really hard time actually doing like good damage from energy orb damage builds. So just buffing Energy Echo to do a little bit more of a increase in damage is going to be helpful in the long run as far as making that build actually viable. Electro Dominance 3 is probably the worst level 3, so we're just buffing the lucky shot that it gives by a significant margin from 50 to 80%, so this might be a little bit more worth going for. Acid Dominance is the worst, in general, the worst of the 3 elemental ascensions to go for, but the level 3 is incredibly powerful. So in general, doing decay weapons on the cat is frowned upon, so we're just going to make the damage scaling on Acid Dominance a little bit more impactful. We're not going to nerf the level 3. I mean, the level 3 is absurd. It's so OP, but we want to keep some OP stuff in the game. It's not like we want to take all that out and ruin everyone's fun. Hex Smoke is probably one of the most incredibly powerful level 1 ascensions in the game. And so we're just going to reduce that a little bit. So no longer does it provide 50% damage reduction. It gives you 30, 45, and 60. So the max level is slightly reduced, and the early levels are slightly reduced. This is an overall nerf, but everyone knows Hexsmoke level 1 is absurdly overpowered. Oops. But because we've reduced some survivability here, we're going to increase survivability somewhere else. We're making Elemental Shield better at level 1. So now it gives 50 at level 1. That scales up to 90 shield. And we're rebalancing its level 3. The level 3 effect gives you immunity to elemental effects, which is absurd. So we're just reducing that duration from 20 to 10 seconds. So you actually have to, throw a grenade every once in a while. And lastly, we're doing a similar thing for defense. We've taken away Hex Smoke. We've taken away Decay Effect, but we're giving back in these other areas. Notice that we're focusing the cat more on something he's sort of neglected as part of his kit, which is his shield, which is something that's important to him. So making Elemental Shield better level 1 is going to be a 1-point wonder. It's going to be great, fits with the cat, and Advanced Shielding is now better at level 1 and scales up to a much higher percentage, all right? And so this has tended to be one of the worst ascensions on the cat by far. But these two, as well as the energy charge increase, significantly improved the defensive capabilities of the cat. They I think they will hopefully make up for Hex Smoke and the fact that we won't be able to slow every single enemy that we meet, as well as make up for the fact that we nerfed his blessings. They should significantly improve the consistency of this character, even though we've nerfed him. The next section is a little chunky because it's Albi, and Albi has quite a bit of problems. But I think these targeted changes should help quite a bit to solve the dog's problems without doing a huge amount of development. Notice how little development the cat needed, and notice how much of these changes are just number changes that I think would significantly improve the playing Gunfire Reborn right now. First thing is extra reserves. We're going to give an extra 15 HP to the dog, just straight up. He needs it. He deserves it. All right. He needs to have more HP to justify the fact that HP is a terrible HP type. Shield is way, way, way better. So let's give him some HP and make it worth it. Next up, Dual Battle Soul. Instead of regenerating 1 HP per second during dual wield, we're going to triple that to 3 HP per second during dual wield. Right now, the optimal way to play the dog is to spend 3 minutes regenning from dual wield after each room, which is very, very silly and should be avoided. Because we have reduced the effectiveness, of Atomic Bomb, We can actually give a buff to grenades, which I think could use a little bit of a base damage increase. So we've got a 25% overall base damage increase to grenades from this talent here. Next up, let's look at Ember Eruption, one of the single worst Ascensions in the entire game. This gives you a very marginal amount of weapon damage increase only when your magazine is below a certain amount, which is terrible. At level 1 for most weapons, this is a 12% damage increase, which is laughable. All right, so what we've done is significantly increase the damage percent that it gives you from 40, 80, 120 to 60, 120, 225. All right, realistically though, this is best used when there's only one ammo remaining in the magazine. And so if you have a 2-weapon magazine, you're getting a 115 average damage increase, right? So this is more in line with what I expect a Ascension that tries to do this should be, and actually will benefit weapons that take a long time to reload with one magazine, significantly. Because if you have Ember Eruption level 3 and a Tiger Cannon, you can get 225 increased damage on every shot. That actually makes that, kind of fun. Twin Gunner now gives a slight rate of fire increase, 10, 15, and 20% here, which is kind of cool and makes sense. And it's only while dual wielding, so there is a limitation here. Lucky Ammo now doubles its lucky shot chance for launchers. So whenever you use a launcher, those need lucky shot more than anything. And keep in mind that lucky ammo applies double because it gives lucky shot to each weapon. And when either weapon has lucky shot, both weapons have lucky shot, is my understanding. I'm not exact. That's what Sophie said to me about how this works. I think that these values are essentially doubled. So like really this gives 40, 60, 80 lucky shot, which is still not quite good enough. But let's double those for launchers so those launchers stay really, really nice and chunky because they can't crit. And so we need to make up for that. And I think that would require some dev, but it would be totally worth it. Ammo Expert is just a little too powerful. Like level 1 solves all your ammo problems. And it doesn't need to be that strong. So we're just nerfing the ammo that it gives you back at level 1 and 2. And then at level 3, sure, let it solve every conceivable, ammo consumption that you would ever need. But we should level 1 should not solve all the problems. We are buffing Survival Instinct at level 1 and making it scale a little bit better. So now bonus HP no longer is times 2 during dual wield, it's times 1.5, but we're increasing the amount that it gives you at all times. So instead of 20, 40, 60 HP, it gives you 30, 60, 90, and then it multiplies by 1.5 during dual wield. So more of the time you're getting a significant HP increase, and it's better at level 1. It still might not be enough, but I don't want to make it too powerful and make it overpowered. So I think this is at least much better than it was before. Sharpshooter, we're going to remove the rate of fire bonus. It doesn't really fit into this, and we're going to add that rate of fire into Twin Gunner and Unleash Potential. So remove that, and now we can improve the accuracy and add some stability bonus, so this makes a little bit more sense. All right. Now, this will allow us to offhand snipers or include snipers in our builds, because we can actually, if the sniper already has like an accuracy or stability bonus, we can actually just keep that in our hand without zooming in and actually use it in a fairly effective way. A sharpshooter allows us to do that if it has these things, and that's going to improve the amount of weapons that we can use, which is something that Dog really needs to do. Also, we are nerfing the cooldown resets. In general, all cooldown resets like this can't be reduced below 2 seconds. So whether this is the Aspis or dual wield, the 2 seconds hard can't reset below that, should stay in effect, which does at least mean that you kind of have to think, and you have 2 seconds of downtime where you won't have your ability working. We are adding 2 rate of fire per stack to Unleash Potential, which makes sense because this is sort of like a fast firing weapon Ascension here. So adding the rate of fire per stack really makes a lot of sense. And this maxes out at 40% rate of fire, which is nothing crazy, but it is very strong. In general, I think this will be in a much better spot once we get this rate of fire added, because I think it's just an okay, like a middling Ascension right now, and it really should be strong. Explosions are getting a little bit of a tweak. Explosion enhancement no longer is going to give you 30, 45, and 100 explosion damage. It will give you 40, 80, and 120 skill damage instead. Because this affects explosions and grenades, I think this is a much more powerful upgrade to the explosion like direction. It buffs grenades, it buffs explosion weapons by 1.5 because of my gameplay changes. So really read that this is a 180% damage increase to an explosion weapon. All right. This is sort of everything you need in one Ascension for explosion weapons and using the grenades at the same time. Mad Bomber is getting a slight change as well. The explosion damage is being increased by 20% at all levels, and the explosion extra damage per enemy is being increased at all levels. And the chance for double damage is being increased slightly. Overall, this is just an explosion damage boost, and I think that this will put explosions in a much better position. Overall, Mad Bomber tended to be quite weak, and I think that doing some of the changes will get it into a much better position. And lastly, explosion weapons and weapons that can't crit in general tend to struggle on bosses. So doubling the effect of precise explosion is going to actually allow the dog to use explosion weapons against bosses without like being really, really weakened by the fact that he's using explosion weapons. Precise explosion is pretty much necessary to be able to take certain bosses down with certain explosive builds. And so doubling this effect will make level 1 precise explosion very, very important to pick before you're like the second boss, and actually effective. I think this would be a very, very good pick for the dog. All right, that covers the dog. What did you think? I think that would put the dog in a much better spot. Solves a lot of his problems just by moving some stuff around. That's really easy to do. What do you think? Next up is the bird. The bird is probably what I would consider the most balanced character, and for that reason has the least amount of changes. His biggest OP Ascension is Gigantic Explosion because the cooldown reduction is way too high on Leap. And so we've reduced that from a max of 60 to a max of 35. It'll still be absolutely incredible, but not quite so overpowered. Steel Armor was something I didn't think was good for a long time, but now know that it is absurdly powerful. We're just reducing that level 2 effectiveness. No longer is this going to give you a 100% damage reduction, but a 60% damage reduction should be just fine. And still very, very powerful and worth getting. So the scaling on this has changed. We are buffing Hail of Bullets 3 to now give plus 25% rate of fire. This should be a fun change and make Hail of Bullets even more powerful. Hail of Bullets, I think, is the hallmark of this character, and making it a slightly more powerful, I think, will only help it out. And then Fierce Wings is the other way that this character does damage, by abusing strong hits after doing cleaves and weaving cleaves in between powerful hits. So buffing the damage on next hit is, I think, a good way to improve the overall damage output of this character now that we've taken away some of his tools. Next up is a multiplayer buff for this character, Deathmark, which is a powerful multiplicative bonus of 20, 40, and 60%. Also will apply to allies, and allies can get the move speed buff if they kill the marked target as well. And lastly here, fully equipped, instead of increasing this duration by these weird numbers, 2, 3, 3, let's keep it all at 2 seconds, but just increase the actual payoff for this. So now it'll only stay at 2 seconds at all levels, but instead our damage bonus will be 75 to 225 instead of 75 to 150. And now we have the core components of doing damage in the bird build without having to go to his blessing to do all that stuff. All right, perfect. All right, next up is the Tiger, Lay Low. The first thing we're changing here is we're giving Chain Lightning an actual elemental effect chance. We've taken away Lightning Messenger and taken away some of this character's more powerful blessing stuff, but Chain Lightning needs to have a higher elemental chance to be usable, especially with the Bolt from the blue build, which just doesn't work unless you get specific Gifted Man talents. So bringing this in line to be able to be used in general is going to be a much better place for Chain Lightning to be. So this should be a significant buff to the character overall. Stormblast 3 should get an extra bonus. Currently it just goes 150, 225, 300. So the third one, I'm just buffing to 350% here. Then Eye of the Storm. Now these are a little bit tougher. I know that my lay low list is the one that's been viewed the most by far of any of my tier lists, and part of this is because some of his ascensions are not clear how they work. But Eye of the Storm is pretty straightforward. You keep shooting something with a sniper, and as you keep shooting it, it does more and more damage. Really, the big change here is that the maximums are now either the same or higher, and you will reach those maximums quicker in the early levels and later in the higher levels. So the best way to think about this is now it takes 3 hits at level 1 to get to the max of 60 increased damage, then 4 hits to get to the maximum of 100, then 5 hits to get to a maximum of 200. All right, so that's the way that I've scaled this to work, and I think it makes a lot more sense, and getting the extra powerful 200% weapon damage is probably worth it, because most snipers kill something far before this. So if you're using a sniper for this reason, you might be using like a sting or woodpecker, and then you actually need this damage to be quite good. Next up, we're improving the utility of Lay Low and making Fulminous Zap slow a little bit more effective. Instead of doing 0.4, 0.6, and 1, this is going to be doing 2, 2, and 2 at all levels of this very high slow. This makes at least one level of Fulminous Zap potentially worth considering on any build, which is where we want to be, because that increases our build variety. Next, we are significantly reducing Fulminous Zap's early point levels so that we don't scale up this Thunder and Glory build too quickly. Before, one level of Fulminous Blast with the Thunder and Glory Blessing was enough to absolutely skyrocket your damage, especially with the level of Thunder Nemesis. So keeping those early points down and really forcing you to go for the later points to get into the crazy damage, I think is a much better place for this build to be. Voltaic Aegis 3 is one of the most powerful ascensions in the game, and incredibly powerful specifically for Lay Low, who has very little survivability. So we are reducing the max stacks from 5 to 4, which means our maximum damage reduction goes from 100% to 80%. That's a much more fair place to be. Currently, having a 5 stack 100% damage reduction pretty much makes you impossible to kill once you get Voltaic Aegis 3, and that's a little bit too easy. We don't want to be basically invulnerable while we play Gunfire Reborn, unless we actually like put the pieces of Exodia together instead of just like getting a level 3 Ascension. You know, that doesn't really count. Next up, we are doing a buff to Thunderbolt Converter. In general, this tends to be quite weak. The way that I've solved this is not by increasing the damage that it gives you very much, but increasing the maximum potential of it earlier in the game. So before, it took 4 hits to get a maximum of 40, so 4 Chain Lightning hits. But now, at level 1, it takes 8 hits, but you can get to a maximum of 80. All right? The level 3 has also been buffed, so you're getting 120% bonus damage as long as you hit one enemy with Chain Lightning between each hit, which is a great, boost for Lightning from the Void. So I think overall this will be in a much better spot. Next up, since we're nerfing the overpowered Voltaic Aegis 3, we should be buffing Supercharge to actually do something a little bit more useful. Currently, Supercharge really doesn't work very well, and it's because this healing from Chain Lightning just doesn't really heal enough. So I'm significantly increasing this, a 50% overall increase at almost every level, and that should put this in a much better position to be used in quite a few different builds. And as a spicier one near the end here, we are going to be doing a good buff to Electric Circuit. Electric Circuit is a cool, interesting Ascension, but just not quite powerful enough. We are making the level 1 significantly more powerful, and the level 3 significantly more powerful. Electric Circuit at level 3 doesn't void connections, so you can sort of Chain Lightning everyone on the map together, hit one, and then it hits everyone. But now, if you hit one person, you will actually do more damage to everyone. And so the level 2 is as powerful as the level 3 as far as damage is concerned. I think this will put this in a much better position. It's really not when you see Electric Circuit, this one triggers off my, I can figure out how to exploit this, you know, like this feels exploitable, but it's not that easy to exploit. And for that reason, it's only okay. And so Electric Circuit definitely needs this buff, and I think it would be spicy and fun. And guess what? Not a single necessary development change in this whole thing, and it would be a huge boost of the build flexibility of the Tiger. Okay, next up we have Tao, the bunny, and the first suggestion that I have for her is based on her talents, and this is galloping speed. Currently, the way this works, you gain movement speed charges as you get kills, and then after you end a particular area, all those stacks fall off, and you go back, like you significantly reduce your movement speed. So for each kill, you're getting plus 10% movement speed, so you're getting plus 50% movement speed after your 5th kill, assuming that there's never 8 seconds that go by without you getting a kill. So the way that I would suggest changing this is to make the stacks independent of each other, but last a little bit longer, so that there's this sort of, there's not this jarring stop to all of your speed, and your speed will kind of naturally go up and down, and I think it'll feel a lot better to the player and feel a lot more natural. And it should still be quite powerful, since the duration is 15 seconds, which is almost double the amount of the 8-second duration. I think that this is a good change. It does require a little bit of development, but I think it would make the bunny feel a lot better. The next thing is we are improving the Blade in Heart talent. This gives plus 5% Swords Out damage for every Blade Heart stack that you have. Currently, Swords Out as a damage move without Ice Blade specifically is very low. The only time it does any good damage is against the final boss's DPS check phase, because your Blade Heart, what is the word? Swords Out has a 0 cooldown, and so you can spam it really fast. So in that case, the Swords Out does actual damage, but in the rest of the time it doesn't. So giving this a significant damage increase, I think, would serve to make this a much more useful way to do damage on the character, without like changing everything in the character. Currently, I don't think this quite does enough to be useful. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make an improvement for Glowing Bloom here. Now, at level 2, we reduce the amount of hits required to trigger Fatal Bloom by 1. So instead of scaling all the way to 3, this is scaling a little bit better. So we're going 100, 200, 300, and then -0, -1, -2 hits to trigger Fatal Bloom. I think this scaling will be a lot better, and especially since we're nerfing Blossom Enthusiast, giving excuse me, some other ways to get to that, to like a similar power level, I think is a good way to go, and probably would make the character more consistent at base level, instead of having to get an OP blessing to make them work. Next up is Cursed Mark. Cursed Mark is going to have its damage reduction increased to be a little bit more on par with Hex Smoke. So now these two do about the same thing. Before, this reduced damage dealt significantly less than Hex Smoke for basically no reason, since the skills are very similar. And Hex Smoke is probably still much better than Curse Mark is, but now the damage reduction that they apply to enemies' attacks is standardized to 30, 40, and 60, and it's better at level 1 than it was before. So I think this puts us in a much better position, and a much more consistent position across all of the whole game. Next, Flower Chain is a cool Ascension that isn't quite super good at max level. After 2 levels of Flower Chain, you start not to get too much utility out of it. I think one way to make this a little bit more interesting would be to remove the crit X. Oftentimes the best weapons that use this are fast firing weapons, or weapons that can't crit, like AoE weapons. So capping the crit X I don't think really helps very much. So I don't think that this is necessary. I think this just should be removed. The cap of the crit X. So if the initial hit crits, then so are the following hits with no crit X reduction. I think that would be much better for the Ascension. Next, No Escape. we're just slightly improving this multiplicative damage increase from 20% to 30%. 20% is already very good, but I think that any build that wants to just, throw in a little bit of a multiplicative damage increase, 30% is like the baseline multiplicative damage increase where it starts to matter and feel worth it. 20% is a little too low. Like 30% is like the inscription that gives you extra damage against bosses. That's a 30% multiplicative damage increase, and it makes a big difference. Precise Explosion is the same. These are sort of like your baseline multiplicative increases. And I think that, a 50% increase overall would be warranted and useful for this particular Ascension. And it would probably be worth picking up in almost every build. So that's good. Next up, we have Mark Chaser. Mark Chaser tends to be a very weak Ascension. The main problem is that it's hard to keep its stacks up. And so all I've done is significantly increase the duration of the stacks at level 2 and level 3 so that this can be better used. Especially if you put a couple points into it, you can actually get a lot of stacks up and keep them going so that you're getting these, big weapon and skill damage increases and lucky shot increases, and you're able to shoot without those stacks falling off. Because that's a big thing. It's like you kind of want to be able to shoot while you're doing Mark Chaser. And currently it doesn't last long enough for you to really be doing both things at the same time. Also, Mark Chaser 3 now gives -1 hit to trigger Fatal Bloom. Because this obviously is a Ascension that is trying to incentivize you to shoot your weapon because it's giving you lucky shot at the end. Synergizing with the Fatal Bloom hit triggers is a very good way to incentivize people to actually pick this Ascension. I think this would be a big buff without making it overpowered. Next up is Empathy with the Sword, which is going to get some real love. We are increasing the percent chance to happen from 10 at all levels to 10, 15, 20%. This is a big buff to this Ascension. This Ascension is borderline okay, so a very small increase will probably make it very good. Keep in mind that at level 3, procs can proc on themselves. Any source of damage can proc an Empathy with the Sword. So doubling this proc chance is actually a huge deal at level 3. Swordsman tends to be relatively weak 1 point for Tau. So we're increasing the damage and skill damage that it gives you from 10 to 8%. And at max stacks, you're getting a -1 trigger to Fatal Bloom. So that makes a lot of sense. When you're doing like a Fatal Bloom build, keeping Swordsman at max stacks is better for the Blade of Bloom build because you have more skill damage, and now it'll be better for the Fatal Bloom build because you'll have -1 hit to trigger. I think this will put this in a much better position. And now we have the nerfs for this character. Both of these nerfs have to do with defense. Sword defense, let's go Sword Guard first, sorry. Sword Guard is by far Tau's best Ascension, by far, and it is incredibly powerful. And I think that we don't want to really reduce the actual power level of it. I think the best way to address this issue is just by making the duration of the Sword Guard buff not last for nearly as long. So we're reducing it from 6, 7, and 8 seconds to 4 seconds at all levels. You can still get crazy healing off of this and crazy shield potential, but now it doesn't last quite as long. So you have to use it at the right time, and you have to be skillful with when you use it. But we're not nerfing its OP. Like, the best part about it is still the same. My cat is. Hello. And lastly, for the only other nerf for Tau is sword defense. The defensive sword build is extremely powerful and uses sword defense and sword guard to sort of make you pretty much invulnerable, especially with a couple levels of sword shadow. And so all we're doing is reducing the power level of the high levels of sword defense. So now it will go, instead of going from 30, 50 to 70, it'll go 30, 40, 50. Level 3 is still already incredibly powerful, but now it's like better as a 1-point wonder and doesn't scale nearly as well, so it becomes less worth it to put all your eggs in the defensive basket, which I think can be a good thing, especially because you can run out of damage pretty quickly on Tau if you just go full defense and you don't have Ice Blade to provide all your damage. All right, next up we have Tiansui, the turtle, and the turtle has like the best shield in the game, and shield is the best HP type of all of the 3 HP types, whether it's armor, HP, or shield. Shield is the best, so he has the most and the best one. So the first thing that we are going to do to bring turtle's power level a little bit down is significantly reduce his starting HP from 60 to 40. That's a 20 HP nerf. This character is very, very hard to kill. And reducing that starting HP just kind of brings his base power level, survivability, in line with the other characters a little bit more, where the turtle's going to be like most of his defense is going to be in his shield and his aspis, and his HP should be very, very weak. This should not have a big impact on the character, frankly, but it is a good nerf that's not heavy-handed. Next up is the talent Swelling Aspis. Swelling Tide, it seems like. When retracting the Tidal Aspis for every 1 second of its remaining duration, minus 10% cooldown of Tidal Aspis. So this is going to have a minimum cooldown of 2 seconds. All right, so no matter what, Aspis will always at least require you to have a 2-second cooldown. And there are changes in the Ascensions that will facilitate this. But there are ways to get around this, like the one that gives you Formidable Aspis. You know, you get extra damage, and any enemy killed reduces the cooldown of Tidal Aspis. So it's like there's ways for you to like essentially have a 0% cooldown, but at base 2 is the minimum that it'll go to. Next one is Unceasing Blow, and this is just a slight buff to the amount of striking punches you get from 2 to 1.5 seconds for every charge. I think this would help out a little bit, especially if you pick up an early wave breaking blow without much other bonuses to punch. It can be very hard to like have enough punches to punch anything. So I think this is a buff that would be probably useful. Next up is Formidable Aspis. Oh yeah, I did change this. Whoops. Okay, so no longer does this reduce the cooldown of Aspis, but it will now reduce the cooldown of Dash. Okay, now that is a cool change. All right, I think this is really, really spicy. So ideally, this type of Ascension buffs like swords and launchers and snipers the most. This means that like especially at max level, you're basically getting a dash per each kill, and you have 5 shots that have this giant damage increase and lucky shot increase. So you kind of get to like pull back your shield and then like doonch, 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 and like make this sort of like really cool play. I think this would be much more interesting than reducing the cooldown of Aspis, and would remove some cheese that you can do with Aspis because you can have a permanent Aspis duration. Next up, we've got Wave Rider. The bonus damage from move speed is reduced from 1.5%, 2% to 1% at all levels, and the bonus damage is only active when the Wave Rider buff is active. Currently, Wave Rider gives you 1.5, 2 weapon and skill damage all the time for every bonus move speed you have. So if you pick up Ostrich Rider with level 3 of this, you just got 100% skill damage and 100% weapon damage on top of everything else that Wave Rider gives you. And it already gives you 40% move speed, which is absolutely incredible. The best, at the top of my scroll tier list is Strategic Advantage, which gives you 40% move speed. This Ascension is insane. It is truly insane. So bringing the damage that it increases in line and giving it only when you have the buff, I think would be a really good way to go with this particular Ascension. Irrepressible Surge. We're not actually going to remove this hurdle spam strategy. I think that's fine. I don't like it, but I think that it was included for a reason, and it actually is harder to use than you might consider. In the lower levels, it crushes though, but at the high level, it's not so bad because it's really hard for hurdle to just kill everything. But we are going to remove the Tidal Aspis retraction cooldown. So basically, this will just allow you to do hurdles during the Aspis for free after getting your first kill. And then it won't do anything after retraction as far as resetting the Tidal Aspis cooldown. And I think that would be a much better spot because it's already absolutely absurd. Battle Adrenaline is getting a slight change here. we are changing the duration from 8, 8, and 10 seconds to 8, 8, and 20 seconds, and the move speed is getting reduced from 4, 6, 8 to 4, 5, 6. We don't, like, this is a good Ascension, but, you know, we just need to lower the power level of some of these movement speed buffs that he can get, because they're all a little bit too much. Like, currently, this at 8% is another 40% move speed, and, like, I don't know if there's another character that can really do that. Like, Tao can get up to 50% move speed at base, which is very, very powerful. All right, but, you know, like, we're looking at a potential of 80% move speed here with Battle Adrenaline and Wave Rider, and you get another 10% from Agile Titan. So, you know, just knocking this down a little bit. I think this tends to be a rather weak Ascension in general, and so I don't think nerfing it a little bit is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to have some Ascensions be weaker than others, and right now, like, I don't think the turtle has any bad Ascensions, and I mean, I don't really, like, he doesn't have any weak Ascensions, would be a better way to put it. Next up is Hostile Gift. Hostile Gift is probably one of the best Ascensions in the game, so we're going to change some things about it. Currently, what this does is it recovers ammo in the magazine, it recovers reserve ammo, and it gives you a massive reload and rate of fire boost, as well as a chance not to consume at level 3. This is a huge DPS increase and basically solves all consumption problems for the rest of the game. So we're going to remove all reserve ammo gained. That is no longer going to be part of the Ascension. The rate of fire and reload are going to be retooled so that they are still as good as they are at max level and not as good in the early game. So the level 1 has been reduced, the level 2 has been reduced, and level 3 is the same. I think that having level 3 Ascensions be incredible is not a bad thing because you're not guaranteed to get them, but having the level 1 stuff be too powerful can be a bad thing. But I think this would still be incredibly powerful and still might be too powerful, but this slight nerf would bring it in line. The main thing about Turtle is that Turtle can't use any weapons while he's in Aspis, so he needs Ascensions to be a little bit stronger on their power levels to keep up, because if he's not going for a punch build, then Aspis is sort of not as good as it was before. And next up, Unbearable Hurdle. Is one of the most overtuned Ascensions in the game. It makes no sense. You know, I get that the turtle, like, has limitations because of its design, but this is not the way to solve them. This is too much. We're reducing the damage reduction to be more in line with other characters. So we're going from 30 and 50, 80 damage reduction on hit to 30, 40, 50. And the damage taken, which is a multiplicative increase, okay, from 30, 60, 100, a 100% multiplicative damage increase. Are you kidding me? That is stupid. It doesn't make any sense, all right, to 15, 30, 45, okay? That's much more powerful. I mean, much more reasonable. It's still a very powerful Ascension. It would still totally be worth taking. It's still probably, like, it's like a better single target Hex Smoke, but currently it is just totally overpowered and makes literally no sense why it is as powerful as it is. Very, very, very silly. Okay, so that concludes all of the Hero Ascension Balance changes that I would suggest. Notice how very little development this would take to implement, and I think that this would put the characters all in a little bit more of a consistent alignment as far as their balance is concerned, and significantly increase the build variety of each of them. And so I think that's a good thing. All right, next up, we're going to talk about scroll rarity changes. Let me get over to these. Okay, so let's talk about why we're doing this. All right, scroll rarity changes. The idea is to make the scroll's rarity more commensurate, more even with its power level. So if something is legendary, it should be very strong. If something's normal, it should be fine, okay, or situational. Right? 2, by having more scrolls in normal than anywhere else, we can lower the power level of a random normal scroll, which right now, in the current way the game is, can be extremely powerful. And certain OP scrolls, like Against the Flow, Elemental Power, can remain OP as long as they are as rare as legendaries are, instead of being as common as normals are. So first off, let's talk about normals. First up is Elemental Power. This spreads elemental effects, which is one of the most powerful possible mechanics in the game, and definitely is not deserving of a normal spot. This would be a powerful legendary and therefore should be a legendary. After that is Against the Flow. Looks like these are not in alphabetical order. Against the Flow is sort of like the light version of Advanced Depot. It tends not to be very limited and tends to work on almost all weapons without much downside. Against the Flow definitely deserves its legendary spot. It is basically Advanced Depot 2.0, and unlike Skateboarder, doesn't really require you to do much, or isn't only useful in specific situations. The amount of weapons this works with is more than half of the cast, so there's really no point in nerfing it. It's good and probably should be a legendary, and it should be as rare as a legendary. Next up is Propulsion Device, one of the best Ascensions in the game. Getting dash 3 charges is very, very powerful. Moving this up to rare would better show you how powerful this scroll is, if you're a new player especially, and would communicate from the developers to the player what is actually good in the game. Advanced Joggers is also incredibly powerful. Most movement stuff in the game is, and so for that reason it should be moved to rare because of how powerful it is, and that way it'll better communicate how powerful it is. Next up is Untold Effort. Whoops. This is a 50% chance to do a 100% multiplicative damage boost. It's like a skill freak with a slight downside, and for that reason it is incredibly powerful in any build that wants to do a skill damage thing. I think that this definitely deserves a rare spot. It's very, very good in the right build. Next up is Bullet Bank. Bullet Bank is probably the single best one scroll wonder as far as ammo problems are concerned. Oops. We're gonna find it. There it is, Bullet Bank. Very, very powerful. Definitely deserves the rare spot. It's probably the best single ammo scroll in the game. Abnormal Speed, incredibly powerful. 30% movement speed when you have max shield or armor. 30% movement speed with most of the time uptime is absurdly powerful, and definitely deserving of the rare spot. And Snow Boots, I would say, is also very good. Immunity to slow should not be underrated. And that's essentially immunity to the decay effect as well. The minus 50% damage taken from traps is fine, but the immunity to slow is much better than you might think. A slow will kill you in high R8 and R7. One slow can kill you because movement speed is so important in the game, and the faster you move, the less likely bullets are to hit you. And so when you get slowed, you're very likely to get hit, and if you hit, you're very likely to die. Something that I want to talk about is you might not really recognize what effect this is having on the game. And this does two things. One, it increases design space, because now if the developers want normals to be more common than rares, we're not just playing with elemental power and Against the Flow. But the better thing is, especially after this, is that the rare pool will have less bloat in it. So if you want a rare scroll from a chat chest, you're likely to get something good as opposed to something random. All right. Right now, the rares really don't make sense as far as they just don't quite make sense as far as their power level. Some of them are really weak, some of them are strong, and there is some good about that because it improves, it increases the randomness of the game. But I will make the case that getting Untold Effort from rare, that is a rare scroll, but it may not impact your build, and so there's already the sense of randomness that's happening. So I think actually this is a buff. All these rarity changes are in general a buff to the character because your decisions will now match up better with your expectations. When you get a legendary scroll, you're getting something good. When you're getting a rare scroll, you're probably getting something on average slightly better than a normal scroll, as opposed to it just being sort of random and all over the place. Rares. Lifesaver down to normal. Since it's a one-time usage, even though I think it's quite powerful, let's keep it at the normal so that it doesn't, seem stronger than it is. Terminal Lucidity. Reset the cooldown of all skills when you lose 20% max HP. This is a cool sounding scroll, but tends not to have the greatest effects. It's better on certain characters than others. I think this is not that strong. It's like average, and so fitting it into normal would be a good way to go. Next up is Giant Slayer. Giant Slayer is a very small amount of damage increase overall. This is essentially 200 damage per hit. That's kind of what it gives you, which is very, very low and not very strong, especially on any weapon that doesn't shoot a lot. Not very strong at all. Next up is Elemental Cube. This gives you 50% damage for a specific elemental type, so not all the time. So it's like on average like 23. No, is that right? Anyway, it's 1/3 of 50% on average damage increase if you're using just no, it is. That's it. That's not very powerful. I do like it. It can be abused. It can be utilized better. You can play smart with Elemental Cube, which I like, but the benefit of it is not super high. And for that reason, I think it should go to normal because it's not super strong. Next up is Flowing Wind. Flowing Wind, I think, is actually quite a good scroll. Whoops. Getting a 20% damage reduction is nothing to scoff at. All you have to do is be moving. It says the faster you move, but I don't think that has anything to do with it. I think it just means like as long as you're moving at all, you get 20% move speed. And I think that's good, but not quite rare good. I think it should be in normal because this would be good to have. And I think having it earlier in the game would be better than otherwise. One thing I noticed here that I'm going to add into this document is Brief Respite. Brief Respite should also go, here it is, yeah, should also go to rare. This is an incredibly powerful scroll, even though it is tough to use, don't get me wrong, but it is incredibly powerful and definitely deserving the rare spot. This is a very common scroll for me to get in my runs right now and totally trivializes certain boss fights, and I get it a lot because it's a normal scroll. Very, very, very strong. Next up is Unfettered Will. This is a 30% damage bonus that is contingent on you having 1,000 copper, I think, which is not that good. So let's put it in normal. Rock Hard Determination, 50% damage while being stationary, not that good. Does decay, it's okay. This is much better in multiplayer than in solo. It's actually way, way, way worse in solo. And solo is much more balanced than multiplayer is, so we should balance around solo. But we shouldn't ignore multiplayer. We shouldn't make multiplayer worse. But putting this in a normal would convey its power level much more consistently. Mid-air Strike is already in normal, so let's put this in normal as well. Persistent is a relatively average level scroll at base without a activator for its combo. And for that reason, I think it should go to normal. I'm never really too excited when I see this as a rare drop, because it's not that strong. Same thing here with Thorny Carapace. It's not bad. It does do damage back. It does have a high chance of applying corrosion. It's an interesting scroll, but it's not very powerful. And for that reason, I think it should be put into the normal rarity. Elite Assassin. Elite Assassin, where you be? Not the most powerful scroll. It can sometimes be good, but it doesn't have any retroactive effects. So if you get it early, it can be better. But in general, it tends to be a pretty weak drop. 10% damage dealt is not multiplicative. It's just an additive damage bonus. So at most, you're getting 50 to 60%, but you're not even getting that the whole run. You're getting that by the end of the run. Not very strong, and definitely deserves a normal spot. In the same reason we want Persistent in normal, Berserk Scroll is worse than Persistent is, and doesn't even provide a huge amount of lucky shot once you get the combo going. So this definitely deserves its normal spot. It's not worth being rare, and it just dilutes the pool. Shrine of Recovery is a total joke, and not good at all. And even the enhanced version is not very good, and definitely should be normal. Ammo Recoverer is not very good, and should definitely be normal. Just does not do nearly enough to justify its rare spot. It's very weak. All of these mutual respect, generosity, field supports, all of these should be normal. They should not dilute the rare pool because they're not worthy of being rare. And they tend not to be very good. And yeah, no. And then lastly here, we've got some legendaries that we are moving down. First one is Fountain of Life. Now, Fountain of Life, after its change, is actually okay, all right? And so for that reason, we're putting it to rare. I almost put it to normal, but I don't think it deserves that treatment. I think it's okay. Mystic Mirror, on the other hand, is not nearly at the same power level as the rest of the legendary scrolls, especially because you can't control what's happening here. It's just a 50% damage boost or a 20% damage taken that just alternates. Not good. I mean, this is worthy of being rare, but the fact is you can't really make this happen when you need it to, meaning, so that makes it just like very average. Reinforced Eggshell is only okay, and definitely much more in line with rare or normal than it is for legendary, and should definitely be removed from the legendary pool. Doesn't make any sense to have it here. Overwhelming Shield. Shrine recovery won't be interrupted when shield is below 50%. While this is a powerful boost, most of the characters that have some like shield synergy already have a way to do this, and so this tends to be very redundant on most characters. So I think that this is not worthy of being legendary, especially considering this doesn't affect certain characters. The dog is very poorly affected by this, and the bird is like not affected by this, and so I think that this should definitely be removed from the legendary pool. It just doesn't pack a punch that it needs to actually be useful. All right, that covers our scroll rarity changes. I think that overall would put the scrolls in a much more reasonable position, and the power level of scrolls would better match up with their rarity. I'm sure there are more changes that we could make beyond that, but I think that's a really, really good start for doing it. All right, and next up, we're going to look at some scroll balance changes. So first off is Flesh and Bones. Let's see if I can get to it. Flesh and Bones is one of the worst Ascent scrolls in the game right now. Red HP is by far the worst HP to have, and the best HP for you to have enemies of. So if you like red HP enemies, they like you to be red HP as well, because you guys are functionally using the same mechanics, right? So to justify Flesh and Bones, we really need to make the regen worth it. Like, we need it to have an impact during play, not just outside of play. And 2% recovery is paltry. It is worthless. So we really need to significantly increase that, and I'm suggesting 7.5% per second would make this scroll on the similar power level as Paranormality. For that reason, it might be worth moving to rare. I haven't included that, but this recovery needs to be very high to justify going all red, because going all red is dangerous. Okay, I'm back. I'm having to do this over the course of multiple days, just because I'm busy, so hopefully I remember where I'm at. Next up is Perfect Sixth. Perfect Sixth is one of the worst scrolls in the game. It's an average of a 10% damage increase. It's actually worse than that, isn't it? Yeah, every 6th shot. So it's worse than 10%, and like if you have a magazine of 4, you never get the benefit. So what I would suggest to change this is, instead of giving plus 50% weapon damage, give a significant boost on that shot, like 100% lucky shot chance. This way, snipers and other weapons can actually potentially stack a couple things on top of the Perfect Sixth and actually make it useful. It's an interesting scroll design. It's just not nearly powerful enough to justify the interest that it actually brings. It would be cool if every 6th shot was a lot of damage so that you could sort of play around that and count your shots. But currently, you really can't do that because the actual benefit it gives you is incredibly paltry, very, very weak. The next change is to Devil's Covenant. Devil's Covenant used to be one of the best scrolls in the game, and a common problem that I see with newer development teams, you know, in contrast with like someone like Ice Frog who does Dota 2, is that when they nerf something, they tend to nerf very heavy-handedly and are not willing to make small adjustments to the game over time. Small adjustments to the game over time is a much better and more effective way to achieve game balance than making these sort of larger changes. And this is a good example of that because Devil's Covenant is not very good right now. In fact, it is very bad. So I've changed the HP reduction from -50 to -25%. The benefit that it gives you is not worth a -50% HP, max HP. That is an incredibly punishing net downside and totally not worth it. I think it'll still be a tough choice, even with the -25% max HP, but at least it won't be quite so punishing. Next up is Wait for Good. Wait for Good is one of the best scrolls for injectors, and specifically hit scan injectors like the Thunderclap gloves, because those hit scan weapons save their state upon starting firing, and all shots during that state are the same. So something like Wait for Good actually causes, it could cause an entire magazine of the Thunderclap glove to be all crits guaranteed. But it actually is not very good on any other weapons with this 10-second cooldown. So we're reducing that to 6 seconds so that it's a little bit more useful elsewhere. 10 seconds is already plenty of time on injectors for you to shoot all of your stuff and then redo the same thing. So lowering it doesn't buff it much on injectors as is. And injectors aren't incredibly overpowered. So the next two changes I don't need to show. They're Evil Devouring Sword and Evil Banishing Totem. I'm adding some development here where these give you that 15% lucky shot if you don't have a cursed scroll. This is the same way that Good and Evil works. Let me see. Not that one. Yeah, Good and Evil, where this gives you lucky shot if you don't own a cursed scroll, and then gives you a really good benefit if you do own a cursed scroll. So I think that these should all probably be in line with each other, and it would be a bit better. And 15% lucky shot is fine. Sucker Punch is a little bit too weak of a ability. I would prefer to see this at 50%, considering this has a downside as far as when it can be used. It's kind of like saying you're going to do extra skill damage on full HP targets, or on enemies that have a lot of shield or something. And so I don't think that you would run any risk of buffing this up to 50%. Skill damage isn't the most effective way to improve damage in general, so getting a little bit more of it's not going to hurt. Rares. Paranormality. This is probably one of the best scrolls in the game because of how powerful shield is naturally. And for that reason, we are reducing it. So no longer will it double your armor and shield, but it increases it by 1.5. This is still an incredibly powerful scroll, and this is evidenced by it previously being I think the third best scroll on my list of scrolls in the all scroll tier list. And I think this still would put it squarely in the very solid category. And most of it has to do with the way that this interacts with a lot of ascensions. So if you have an ascension that gains shield, well, you're actually gaining 1.5 shield. And so all of those ascensions that improve your shield or your armor get significantly more powerful because of paranormality. And that's why it's so good. I think with this change, it would be a little bit less overpowered, which would be nice. The next change is Giant Slayer. Giant Slayer, we're just increasing this percent chance to 25%. And let me do some math real quick. All right, so the Giant Slayer change, if we improve this from 10 to 25%, that would be a 150% average damage increase overall for the scroll. The scroll right now is doing 200, or an average of 200 damage per hit, and that would bring it up to around 500 damage per hit, which I think is a bit more reasonable and more interesting because you can actually use this in specific builds to be much more powerful. So Giant Slayer would be getting a significant buff here, and I think it's bad right now, so I'm trying to get it to be good but not amazing. Next up is Deadly Counter. Deadly Counter makes, after taking damage, all hits become crits. Keep thinking I'm going to get lucky. Just scroll right to it. For 3 seconds. I'm just nerfing this just a little bit, so this is more in line with Deft Hands. Deft Hands has an incredibly powerful payoff, and it has a 2-second window. I would say Deadly Counter has a similar powerful payoff, so let's move it to a 2-second window. I think it makes more sense there. Elemental Convergence tends to be a relatively weak... oh, here it is. And we're just buffing this slightly. So instead of going 15 to 75, needing 5 stacks to get maximum, we're going 20 to 80, needing 4 stacks to get to higher maximum. The problem with elemental convergence is that you need enemies to be alive and under an elemental effect for it to take effect. And that's actually like, and there's no decay effect either. So like, you know, like they don't, that damage increase doesn't persist. So the second they die, you lose damage. And so for that reason, elemental convergence tends not to be that good, even though it has like some potential to be good. So buffing it up definitely won't hurt. Unfettered will must be here. Ah, yes, behind my head. We're just going to increase the maximum value that you can get from 30% to 45%. So that would cause you to be sitting around with 1,500 copper, and you would be getting a 45% weapon damage increase. Nothing special, but you know, fairly strong. And that actually might be a little bit more powerful than I realized, because holding on to 1,500 gold is pretty easy in this game. So maybe that might need to be reconsidered, but I don't think it's too bad. It's not a huge increase anyway. Next up is Strategic Advantage. This is the top of my tier list. If we take out all the absolutely broken stuff like you know, Elemental Weave, Advanced Depot, and Spirit Feline, the best scroll in the game is Strategic Advantage. This is a permanent 40% move speed on one scroll. You know, you do use your dash consistently, and with the max level talent tree, because of the cooldown reduction on your dash, you can dash before 3 seconds are up. And Strategic Advantage has a 100% uptime. My suggestion for this is not a nerf as much as it is a change. I think it would nerf it slightly just because of how powerful it is. But since this isn't a legendary scroll, what I would prefer it to do is last, instead of 3 seconds, 1 second, but give you 100% move speed. So now we've moved this into like an actual strategic time. So now your dash becomes this like super fast movement boost, so you can reposition every time you dash, as opposed to you just you know, permanently, strategically, but permanently having movement speed. I think this would be much more interesting. Next up is Energy Sandals. Energy Sandals is one of the more interesting cases for the game. Let me see if I can. There it is. This stores 12 points for each dash and consume when using a secondary skill. This is actually a multiplicative increase. So this says plus 1% skill damage, but I think the current understanding of this is that it's a multiplicative increase. Anyway, it's still not that great because you have to do like 3 dashes to like get any useful like use out of it. If you're like actually playing a skill build, a skill-based build, 12% is not enough, and you're really casting more skills than 1 dash would ever give you. So we just need this to be a little bit more powerful. Like if you're going to dash twice before doing something, you should be getting a significant bonus for that, especially considering the fact that 12, you need to dash like 8 times before you start getting a really significant bonus. But this is a slightly more than doubles the amount of points you get per dash. Same thing here with Skill Booster. We're going from 2 points to 5 points. The idea here is to bring up the base versions of these scrolls and lower their enhanced versions. Their enhanced versions are really overpowered, and those just need to come down just a little bit, which is a weird balancing thing where like the base one is so bad and then the enhanced ones are so good. Let's just like move those a little closer together. All right, it doesn't help to have it like that. Next up is Dormant Bullet. Dormant Bullet is okay. This guy must be behind my head. Yep. The fewer bullets remaining in the magazine, the higher the weapon damage, up to 75% increase. And that sounds good, but actually that's like an average of a like 32.5 damage increase over the course of a full magazine. But if you can keep your magazine low, like with Against the Flow, then this does more. In general, I think for a rare scroll, we should probably be getting an average of 50% weapon damage out of a scroll like this. And so I've increased it from 75 to 100. Next up is a spicy take of mine. Explosive bullets. I'm suggesting some development for this. We're increasing the base damage from 100% to 150%, but we're also giving it some AoE. So this would allow non-elemental weapons to actually do like AoE damage in explosions, which actually adds an interesting mechanic to the game. It would require a little bit of development, but my assumption is it wouldn't be very much. And lastly here for our scroll balance changes, I've got surprise bonus. Surprise bonus, there's a 15% chance to double damage for any skill dealt. I'm suggesting that goes up to triple. A 15% chance for double damage is actually a really small amount of a multiplicative increase. I'd much prefer this to be like something like triple, where you can like really tell when it triggers, because currently you can't really tell, and I don't think that would be overpowered at all, and it would be interesting. Most of the rest of the legendaries, in fact, all of the legendaries I haven't touched. I think that these are fine to be really, really powerful. Removing the stuff that's overpowered out of here would probably be a good thing. But for the most part, I actually like where these are at as far as their power level. I don't think that it would be a good idea to take away some of this really cool stuff and try to balance everything in the game. I just want there to be more options. And so much of what I'm suggesting are actually buffs. And just removing the things that are like, notice that most of my nerfs are the stuff that you get more often. Like, you know, the nerfs are in the rares and the normals. As far as like their rarity changes and stuff like that, you know, there's like, we want some powerful stuff in the early game because it's hard to get through the early game, but we don't want to use the same things every single game, and right now that seems to be the case, or at least is somewhat the case. So let's move on to enhanced scrolls. Enhanced perfect 6 is doing something similar to what we did above. Instead of giving 100 lucky shot, we're giving 250 lucky shot on every 6th shot, and we're removing the weapon damage. This work would require a little bit of development, but I think it would be really, really good. Midair Strike is absolutely broken in its enhanced version. We're going to reduce that damage reduction from 90% to 60%. That's still incredibly powerful, but we don't need a 90% damage reduction on, you know, on a jump. That's just, it's just not fun. It's just like silly. It's just like so OP and also not fun at the same time. Like it doesn't, I don't think it works. Enhanced Brief Respite, instead of giving you permanent vulnerability for the whole game, let's just make it easier to use and slightly better. So the overall invulnerable, so now we're just gonna increase the cooldown from 2 seconds to 3 seconds. So every time you swap weapons, you get 2 seconds of invulnerability with a 3-second cooldown. All right, so there's 1 second there where you're not where you are vulnerable, but now you've sort of doubled the effectiveness and increased the uptime with less technical upkeep. I would take this scroll. I avoid this scroll right now because it's so overpowered. Enhanced Paranormality is incredibly strong still, but we are reducing that max shield and armor from 2 to 1.5. That being said, this is still going to be one of the best enhanced scrolls in the entire game. Enhanced Triple Comeback is probably the single best, maybe single best enhanced scroll in the game as far as solo and affecting your ability to complete a run. And so for that reason, the 2 extra revives that it gives you should be at 75% max HP and armor, which is a buff compared to the original, which is 50% max HP and armor. Giant Slayer at an enhanced, we're increasing to a 35% trigger, which is a significant increase. Deadly Counter, we're going from 6 seconds to 4 seconds to stay in line with our 2-second base time. Enhanced Elemental Convergence, we're increasing it to 25 per enemy with no cap. It was at 15%, so that's a significant increase, about a 40% increase in damage. Enhanced Unfettered Will has no cap, and we are changing the way that it scales. Let's go look at that. Originally, this was doing 3 weapon damage for every 100 copper, and I've increased that to 5% weapon damage for 100 copper. So for every 1,000 gold you have, you're getting 50% weapon damage. All right, so at 10,000, that's 500% weapon damage. Does that seem a little strong? It does seem a little strong, doesn't it? Maybe that one's not a good one. All right, Energy Sandals, though, this one is important. So the enhanced version of these gives you a 33% chance to instantly completely fill all of your points on dash. And Skill Booster gives you a 33% chance upon a crit to fully replenish all of the, 500 points. Those are ridiculous numbers, okay? 1 in 3, so I've just nerfed them to be more reasonable. 1 in 5 dashes gives you full charges, and 1 in 10 crits gives you full charges, which is actually still absurd. Skill Booster Enhanced is still one of the best enhanced scrolls in the game, because that is a 500% multiplicative skill damage increase. that is on any fast firing weapon would be like so easy to just keep all the time. And lastly here for enhanced scroll balance changes, we've got explosive bullets. We're adding that 4 AoE, and we're increasing the base damage by 50% as well here. And I think that will require a little dev, but it will be a really interesting and useful mechanic to add to the game. Next up, we're going to look at cursed scrolls really quick. Mostly we are buffing all of the ones that are not quite strong enough. So no discounts. Instead of being 20%, we're at 30% more effective. Inferior magazine, instead of a mag cap of -20, it's -30. Old belt is -40% reserves instead of just 20%. Broken bullet is -25 damage to shield and armor. Broken gun is 15% chance to deal only 1 damage, so now that's increased to a 20% chance. Sabotage magazine is now a 40% chance to use additional ammo in the magazine for each shot. And I think that covers everything. So not huge decreases, but trying to get these more around the same power level. Some of these are way worse than others. Like Moldy Bun, you know, is fine, but like Arms Trafficker is really, really bad. Fragile Body is really, really bad. Elemental Curse is really bad. Cat Eye Sight is bad. Old Battle Boots, these are actually like legitimate, you know, curse scrolls. So let's nerf the ones that basically don't matter. All right, these still might not be like buffed enough, and when I say buff, I mean like they may not be powerful enough to be as negative an impact as they probably need to be. All right, next up is inscriptions. Okay, so something to keep in mind with inscriptions. All right. So when you end a run, I would say that 9 times out of 10, if you get all the way to the end of a run, you are given an opportunity multiple times to re-roll all of your normal inscriptions into rare inscriptions. And for that reason, most of the time when you end a run, you rarely actually have normal inscriptions. And not only that, the later you go into the game, the more and more likely the weapon drops are to have fewer and fewer normal inscription drops, because rares start to become more and more common. This is one of the problems with the game, is this inscription rarity issue, where there are a lot of rare inscriptions that are really bad, and they cause so many of the weapons throughout the game to be just absolutely trash, okay? And so you're rarely given an opportunity to actually change your weapon as the game goes on. And so what this aims to do is to change the inscription rarities so that they match better with their power level. All right, and overall this will be a buff to everyone in the game, because what this will do is it will mean that more often weapons are more powerful, because the good normal inscriptions aren't basically hidden away and unobtainable, because we're moving a lot of those into the rare category. So I think that covers what I want to cover there. And we're trying to bloat the common inscriptions so that there's more randomness there in the common inscriptions, which where they should be the worst, right? But we're also putting everything, as much stuff that impacts base damage, into common as possible. Base damage is sort of like getting weapon levels, all right? So the more weapon levels you have, the less effective it is. So if I go from level 30 on a weapon to level 35, that's a much, much lower overall damage increase than going from level 0 to level 5, which is like a massive damage increase. So if we put those base weapon damage increases into common, they're going to be much more impactful early in the game. And so for that reason, we can actually buff early game with normals, and then those tend to not be in the later stages of the game. All right, so first things first, the 50% damage under elemental effects is a multiplicative damage increase and definitely deserves being into the rare category. Very, very powerful. 80% stability and accuracy is probably one of the best normal inscriptions in the game and definitely deserves being in rare. When magazine is 50% or more, plus 50% rate of fire and 0.02 projectiles, definitely deserves to be rare. One of the best possible inscriptions you can get on any hit scan injector, and very good on most weapons, especially because you can sort of shoot through half the magazine and then just reload and just kind of keep doing that. This is extremely good and definitely deserves to be bumped up. There's already stuff, you know, that gives you projectile and rate of fire and stuff. You know, like this is a cool inscription. It deserves to be in rare. Reload 55% when magazine is empty. Better in rare. We've already got the 40% reload in normal. Let's move this 55% reload into the rare category where we can actually differentiate between their power level. This is an incredibly powerful inscription and definitely deserving of the rare slot. Explosion AoE minus 20%, rate of fire and reload 40%. Extremely good for any explosion weapon. Does just about everything you'd need it to. And very powerful on certain weapons like the Sting, Glimmering, Tiger Cannon. Especially if you get like a magazine increase or you do a magazine share, having this on that is just absurd because you get 40% rate of fire. Very, very powerful. The 50% rate of fire after killing an enemy is extremely powerful as well, and definitely should be on more late game weapons because of how good it is. But right now, you almost never see this on a late game weapon because it's stuck in normals. And +1 piercing, +1 projectile speed, also extremely good. Having piercing and projectile speed is very, very good. As you get into the later stages of the game, projectile speed matters more and more. It matters so little in the Longling Tomb, but that's where you get it the most because that's where all the normal inscriptions drop. So let's move these into rare, get them into the late game, get them onto weapons in the late game, and let's all benefit from it. Rares are all moving down to common overall, except for 2 of them. When reloading right after killing an enemy, plus 50% reload, this is only an okay inscription, should be moved to common. 50% lucky shot after killing an enemy, not very good, only good on snipers and slow hitters. This is going to be moved to common. 50% elemental effect chance on crit. This is okay, but it's only a 50% increase. It's only on crits, and so I think it should be moved to common so that there are some elemental percent increases in common. We have a lot of very powerful elemental percent increases in the rare category, so moving the weakest one down to common makes a lot of sense. Next up is 0.8 crit for 1 second after using scope. This is okay, not super strong. Interestingly enough, it gives you this 0.8 crit even after if you cancel the scope and just hip fire. For the rest of the mag, so that's kind of interesting. Plus 1.2 crit X and rate of fire minus 10. This is a very good inscription, but because it has the minus rate of fire, I think this probably deserves to be in the common area, and it's a little bit better earlier in the game than it is later in the game. After killing an enemy, plus 50% lucky shot for the next hit for melee should go to common, same way it did appear for all other weapons. Drop ammo for current weapon kill on crit kills, very worthless, and fine. We'll put this in common. It's rare that you have... It's rare that this solves your problems for ammo in the late game. Very rare. Plus 80% weapon damage on hit after making crit hit 2 times in a row. Let's change this into common. This 80% is base damage. And there are a couple other base damage rare inscriptions that I could move into the common area. I might add those to this. I think I took them out for a little while because I had some community feedback that didn't really like them, but I think that they should move down. And it would be a very easy change that would make a big impact. Lastly, here we've got 2 things that are moving up to unique. Projectile plus 0.2 for every enemy killed resets on reload. This is an incredibly powerful no reload synergy inscription. This, when maxed out, is a 200% multiplicative damage increase. Because this says projectile plus 0.2, it's actually projectile plus 20%. That's the way it works. So it multiplicatively boosts other projectile increases. Insanely powerful. Okay. When triggering an elemental effect, spread it to all enemies within 8 meters. This is better than most uniques. Like already better, and it's a rare. This has no business being in the rare category. Neither of these 2 do. These should definitely be uniques. They're incredibly powerful, and they're going to get nerfed as well and still deserve to be in unique. All right, 200% multiplicative damage increase. All right, spreading elemental effects is absurdly powerful in the current state of the game. Absurdly powerful. And to change that would require so much work. So let's not change it. Let's just make stuff like this a little bit more rare and not on, like half of or like a third of the weapons that I see. That's an extreme exaggeration. But I probably see it like 4 times in a run, which is not an exaggeration. All right, inscription balance changes. How are you guys? This is long. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep going. We're getting to the end. See here? We're on page 11 of 15. All right, we're getting there. Inscription balance changes. Overall, 80% of these are buffs. Okay, we are buffing so many inscriptions in the game. It is gonna, if I got my way, so many more weapons on average would be much better because of the changes that I'm making and require very little development to get there. First thing we're going to talk about is the most development intensive area, and that is Geminis. The first thing we're going to do is the magazine capacity Gemini. We're going to increase that rate of fire from 25% to 40%. Most magazine cap shares, magazine cap Gemini shares do so for the magazine more so than they do for the rate of fire. But being able to get that rate of fire up, I think is going to help this be a more viable Gemini for more different weapons. Anything that can really use some rate of fire could actually use this Gemini a little bit better. And at 25% rate of fire, it's just not doing it. And so it basically only gets used for one usage, which is the magazine cap share. So I think this won't make the Wild Hunt any better. It won't make Aura Venom any better, and so for those reasons, those are like the big, magazine cap share Geminis. So if we're not buffing those, we're probably okay to buff rate of fire, as long as we're not making those things stronger. Next up is Spores. This will require a little bit of development. We're going to give it 20% base damage. So currently what it does is each spore explodes and then does like 100% base damage of the weapon that like put the spore on them when you hit with the other weapon, right? So we're changing this so that the base damage of that explosion is increased by 20% for each level of your lowest level weapon. Okay, so if you have a level 20 weapon and a level 10 weapon, when you at any time that either weapon explodes those spores, it's going to get a extra 200% base weapon damage because your lowest leveled weapon is level 10. Level 10 times 20% is 200%. And so this is a way to like buff this and give it scaling, because the biggest problem that Spores has right now is it scales very poorly. So this allows it to scale into the late game, and you can make decisions that actually make it better. And it gives you like a reason to be like, oh, a plus 10 dropped. That's about as good as my offhand weapon on dog. Like, I'll switch. Spores might be actually usable after this. All right, so this is a complete rework. The original one gives you 50% additive damage, I think. All right, whenever you like for like 10 hits, when you kill one, all I know is it's terrible, frankly. All right, it really is bad, and surprises me that it was added to the game. We're going to change this. Now, killing an enemy with your currently held weapon gives your other weapon an 80% multiplicative damage boost for 3 seconds. 80%, very strong, but not incredible. I would say that's about on power level with most of the other Geminis. Except for the Elemental Gemini, which is very, very, very powerful. And actually incentivizes you to switch, because you kind of have to be bouncing back and forth between both of the weapons, and they have to get a kill before you can switch to the other one. I think this would be very strong, very fun, and would actually incentivize you to use 2 weapons, which isn't happening right now. Same thing with Spores here. Elemental Share, I think this is by far the most overperforming Gemini. But I don't want to nerf it too bad, because we did change the way that element effects are scaling down. What I would suggest to make this Gemini not quite so overpowered is to focus just on sharing effect chances and totally remove the damage type bonus that you get. So now if you do an elemental share and you have a corrosion weapon on one hand and a fire weapon on the other, you'll no longer do bonus damage to armor, which you normally would. And that's a massive 50% damage increase. Actually, it's a 75% multiplicative damage increase that you're sort of losing by having the elemental share no longer share its damage type. But we still are going to share the 100% elemental effect chance. So we can still take advantage of that, and that will still be really strong. But what this really does is forces players to switch weapons when they want to do the right damage type to the right character. So now they have 2 elemental weapons, right? So we want them to utilize that. So if I have a fire tower and an aura venom, there are times when I want to use the aura venom and times I want to use a fire tower. These changes, if nothing else happened, would make a massive difference in the game. Massive difference in the replayability of the game. Next up, let's look at the 50% chance to cause an explosion that deals corrosion damage when killing an enemy. This does 100% base damage, which is not enough. Should do around 250 base damage, which would be much more useful. Next, the melee attack speed increase. Let's buff that from 25 to 35% attack speed. Currently, melee is really struggling in R7 and R8, and so little buffs to those are probably a good thing. Plus 30% weapon damage against elites and bosses. This is a multiplicative damage increase, so it is very powerful, but I think that this could easily go up to 50% and not be a problem. Right now, elites and bosses tend to be like, not the place that you die, and having this inscription on weapons that tend to perform poorly on bosses really allows you to use a certain weapon for the whole game, and so really that's what this would do. What it really makes certain weapons, like I don't really care about this on an angelic aura, right? Because like angelic aura already melts bosses, but on like a tiger cannon or like a rainbow, something like that, this is actually pretty useful, and I would consider picking it. And 30% is okay, but 50% is better. 40% damage increase, minus 50% accuracy. Probably the worst rare of the entire pool. Minus 50% accuracy is a terrible downside. This is one of the few that I would require development, but instead we should just give a 25% multiplicative damage boost and minus 25% accuracy. Having minus 25% accuracy is extremely debilitating on quite a few weapons. So 50% accuracy is just a joke. It really is. Like this, it makes so many weapons unusable. And remember, this is the type of inscription that just appears on weapons, like for the whole late game, just something that makes it unusable almost. All right, and it's base damage increase. So this is like 2.3 weapon upgrades. That's what this damage is. Horrible. Next, we're going to nerf the projectile increases. I talked about this. So now instead of giving 20% up to 200%, we're giving 10% per kill up to 100%. That's still 100% multiplicative damage increase. This nerf still makes this very good. Plus 0.02 crit X on each crit kill up to 4 times crit and will be reset on a normal hit and miss. Now this stacks up a lot faster. It stacks up more than twice as fast. Right now, this, because it's so punishing on its reset, it just needs to stack a little faster. Like weapons that don't shoot quickly can't use this, and weapons that shoot really quickly miss a lot. So in general, like just making this stack faster is going to be a buff for it without making it overpowered. Next is a nerf. This is a nerf to no reload synergies. The plus 10% lucky shot chance for every 10% ammo consumed. We are now reducing that maximum to 80 lucky shot from 100 lucky shot. So still very powerful, just a slight nerf. Plus 35% weapon damage against enemies within 8 meters, but minus 50% effective range. We're just going to increase this damage from 35 to 50%, as that's a much more reasonable amount of damage to be getting. Plus 10% lucky shot, but minus 10% accuracy briefly on each kill. I'm going to suggest a development change here, where this no longer reduces accuracy, but reduces stability. Accuracy on a shotgun is life or death. Is whether or not this is only good, like shotguns are only good in the late game if they can use, if they have fair accuracy. So reducing accuracy makes this inscription actually a negative, but reducing stability doesn't reduce accuracy and just makes it harder to handle. At that point, skill comes into play and is much more interesting than doing accuracy. So changing this from accuracy to stability would be a huge buff for this shotgun inscription. Plus 10 weapon base damage upon hitting an enemy up to 200% reset on a miss. Now would have stacks on a miss instead of resetting completely. This would be a much better place for this to be. All of these resets on a miss can be way too punishing, especially for this one, which builds up so slowly. When reloading right after killing an enemy, plus 50% reload time, this can now only appear on weapons with a magazine greater than 4. All right, anything that has like 1, 2, 3 magazine size, really should not be seeing this inscription, especially stuff that has 1 magazine, because you would, like, so I shoot a tiger cannon, right? Okay, the tiger cannon is in the air. I start to reload. It kills the thing. I'm already reloading, so my reload speed doesn't increase. So I reloaded at normal rate, even though I killed the enemy. No, thank you. Plus 50% lucky shot chance on the after killing an enemy should only appear on the same weapons as the 2-mag exclusive and melee. This is really, really, really horrible on almost all weapons in the game. So we just need to get it down to like snipers, some shotguns, some explosive weapons, and some melee weapons, and get it out of the pool for everything else. When triggering an elemental effect, spread it to all enemies within 8 meters. Now it's just going to spread to one enemy within 8 meters, which if you've ever played with the elemental power and you know what you're doing, you know is already insanely powerful. So this is still worthy of being unique and would still be very, 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 very good. Exclusives. Plus 65% weapon damage against enemies in an elemental effect. We're just going to increase that by 10%. Plus 5% weapon base damage up to 100% when triggering an elemental effect. Duration resets on each trigger. This is good, but it's because it's base damage, it scales really badly. So we just need to really crank up this maximum, all right, from 100 to 200%. Keep in mind that this 200% is the same pool that weapon upgrades get added to. So the later you go into the game, the worse this gets. So we need it to have a high maximum so that it actually can be, used. After killing an enemy, plus 30% move speed and lucky shot chance. We're just going to increase that lucky shot chance from 100 to 150. This is a good exclusive, but we really want to improve the odds that they're going to kill the next enemy they hit. And 100 lucky shot isn't quite enough. 150 would do better, especially with the shortcomings that weapons have right now. All right, we got a big one. The uniques. Okay, there are a lot. I'm going to take a drink real quick. There are a lot of uniques in the game that just don't quite have what they need to actually do what I think they're trying to do. Okay, let's just jump right into it. Okay, the Argus one gives an effective range increase and a piercing increase, but it moves so slowly that it's really hard to use. So just giving it a 50% projectile speed would be a little development that would go a long way. Aura Venom. Gives weapon base damage. Here, base damage, think bad. As long as you hit again within 1.8 seconds, this can increase up to 100%. So I'm just increasing that maximum up to 200% since it's base damage, so that it actually scales okay in the late game. Otherwise, this is not worth it, really. Really just not worth it. Big Hippo tends to be a pretty bad weapon. So let's make the exclusive a little bit better and increase the rate of fire from 50, which is already insane, to 75, which is really insane. This thing is going to be a laser, which should be super fun. Bone Dragon. We are increasing the multiplicative damage boost that this gets to enemies in the center from 50 to 80%. Deafening Mortar. There's a 20% chance to consume 0 ammo when shooting. Let's bump this up from 20 to 40. Yeah, this weapon's overpowered, but this inscription is trash. So let's make it a little bit more useful. Double Caliber. After hitting an enemy with both bullets, next shot has plus 1.5x crit. Remember that this weapon already has a huge amount of crit, so giving it 1.5 crit is not a big increase in actual damage. We need to double this for it to be a meaningful increase in damage. And this is because when crit is high, adding more crit is less and less and less and less effective. All right, so it sounds good in theory. Whoa, 1.5 crit. If I added that to a shotgun, it would be popping. But double caliber, not so much. Dragon Chaser. When the mark exists, plus 1 crit and stability 50%. So I'm changing this now. Plus stability and accuracy when the mark is not placed. So it becomes very accurate when you're shooting it without a mark placed, and then you get the crit X when the mark is placed. Okay, this makes a lot more sense for where Dragon Chaser is. Fire Tower, plus 100% lucky shot chance on the second phase attack when attacking enemies with more than 50% HP. This just doesn't need this 50% HP conditional. I get that Fire Tower felt like it was OP for a little while there, but it's not that OP. So removing this 50% HP conditional and giving 100% lucky shot on the second shot sounds fine. Okay, it's gonna be rare that you even get this, right? Golden Bow, arrows can explode. This used to be 100% base damage, which is terrible. Now let's get that to 500 base damage, which is about the same as the Fireball unique inscription. So it does good damage as opposed to trash damage. Hell, let's do a slight increase. This is already a very good multiplicative damage increase. We're just going to go from 30% to 40% projectile. And this should be a significant increase but not an crazy increase. This is already a fairly powerful inscription, excuse me. Illusion, we're actually going to give this a little slight nerf. The projectiles +3, effective range +80% is extremely powerful. We're not going to remove the actual projectiles. We're just going to remove that effective range buff. We're going to half that from 80 to 40. So very slight decrease. Next up is the laser glove. This has a chance to launch a little missile when shooting. The missile does 100% base damage, which is laughable. It does so little damage. Remember that each little tick of the laser glove is its base damage. So like it does like 40 damage. So let's multiply that by 12 and maybe it'll be at least somewhat usable. Prism deals extra damage when projectile goes through an enemy, but it lowers your rate of fire. The prism is not a good weapon. Let's remove this rate of fire reduction. It has no point being here and serves no purpose. And it's not an overpowered weapon. Like, we're not afraid of prism being overpowered. Rainbow arc, plus 10% damage for every ammo consumed during charge, max plus 80. So we're buffing this to 15% damage for each ammo consumed, up to a 120% damage increase. This should significantly improve the viability of this unique inscription, and make rainbow arches very, very powerful when they do drop with this. Scorching rounds. Killing an enemy on crit hit causes a fire explosion that deals 150% damage and applies burning to all enemies in the area hit. Let's get this a little bit more in line with the current explosion damage and pump it up to 200. Same thing with Talisman. It has a 150 damage for explosion. I did not explain that very well. Talisman can cause elemental explosions that do 150% of the weapon's damage to all enemies in 4 meters. Let's bump that up to 200%. And Wild Hunt has a you have to be very close to get this benefit, so let's really pay out for it. 80% is good, but let's pop it up just a little bit to 100% lucky shot. All right, I think this is the very last section. All right, I got time. It only took me 2 days to do this. Okay, last one. All right, weapons. Overall, once again, 80% buffs. All right, so the average weapon is getting way, way, way more powerful. Okay, and let me restate that. The average weapon is getting more powerful, and the best weapons are getting just a little less powerful. Okay, and that's a good place to be. All right. Overall impacts: 80% of these are buffs. We're nerfing the OP offenders, and there's only one major nerf to Demon Lore, but it's still going to be absolutely ridiculously powerful. Dragon Chaser. Reduce base stability, increase base damage, and increase rate of fire. Nothing special, but I think these changes, so keep in mind, I'm trying to do little changes that are just going to make these weapons just a little bit better. And I think this would be a good way to do that. This weapon doesn't need stability when it starts off, right? Because you place the mark, right? Rainbow Arch, base accuracy increased by 25%. So that's just when you're firing the machine gun, it stays a little bit more accurate. And the secondary fire damage is increased by 20% overall. So I think this would be a useful increase. Make that secondary shot a little bit more useful. Make it a legitimate option for lay low. Concealed ammo. Secondary skill damage increased by 20%, but we need to make sure that the 6 ammo exclusive does not increase in damage overall. So we're just increasing its normal secondary skill. This used to be an overpowered weapon because you could use like wait for good and cause it to crit, but that's been taken away. And since then, concealed ammo has been really, really trash. So let's increase the damage by 25% and give an elemental effect chance of 30%. This will require a little bit of development. I don't have the dev tag here though. Demon Lore. We're just going to reduce the stacks from 99 to 50. All right, and there's a really good reason for doing this. All right, this is still going to be absolutely absurd. Just so if you have a no reload synergy with Demon Lore, you're going to mow through the whole game, even at 50 stacks. Okay. But what this does is it makes it a little bit less OP in multiplayer. When you get a Demon Lore combo in multiplayer, you literally kill everything before everyone, which is stupid, okay? It's not fun. So if we reduce the max stacks here, we just make it so that when people play multiplayer, and someone gets a Demon Lore combo, they don't kill literally everything on the map like every single run. Scalpel, this has a 10% elemental effect chance, which is way too high. Let's just have that to 5%. This will be in line with Angelic Aura. This weapon is incredibly powerful, and this nerf will not be a huge impact on how it works. Angelic Aura, crit X from 3 to 2.5. So that's a very slight nerf to Angelic Aura. Star Devourer, let's get into some buffs. Magazine capacity increased by 50%. One of the most annoying things about the Star Devourer is like that it just like keeps running out of ammo so quickly. So increasing that magazine capacity would be a big thing. And let's increase its elemental effect chance from 10 to 12%. So that this is more in line with something that's actually a shock applicator as opposed to like whatever it's trying to be right now. Glimmering. Glimmering, let's remove the 50% damage on the initial hit. So the initial hit normally sticks in them, but that hit actually does 50% reduced damage. That's the way it's coded in the game right now. So let's just remove that. Let's also buff the move speed from 20% to 35%. All right, you got a little tiny kunai, all right, and swords. Okay, swords make you really fast. The kunai should make you really fast. Okay, 35%. All right. Elemental effect chance is increased from 10 to 15%, and the base damage is increased by 10%. You might look at this and say that's not enough. Good. The main reason I'm doing this is a slight increase overall, but the main thing is that it's fast. All right. You have we're going to have Prism and Glimmering be very, very fast movement speed weapons, and they'll be unique in that way. And that actually gives them some utility in certain builds. And I've got some theory crafting that I could get into, like, your main hand weapon on dog is what determines your move speed. So if you have a fast move speed main hand weapon, then your offhand weapon doesn't affect you. So you could have something like this Glimmering and a Tiger Cannon and be moving at plus 35 move speed. Something to keep in mind. Prism, same thing. Move speed increased to 35%. Base damage increased by 25%. So that's a significant base damage increase for the Prism. Scorching Rounds is a big change to this weapon. I don't like the way this weapon. I want to like Scorching Rounds. I like the way it's visually designed. I like the way it feels to shoot it. The problem is it kicks so bad that you like really can't aim with it. And part of that is because the rate of fires and the stability aren't really like, they don't mesh. So we're going to significantly buff the base damage, significantly reduce the rate of fire, reduce the magazine capacity, and make it kick even more. So now you've got like these really big shots, all right? Which means that the burning effect will do more damage, and you're shooting fewer shots. I think this will feel a lot better to use, and once you start seeing some crazy high crits on this Scorching Round with these changes, you're going to be very happy that it got changed. Talisman, slight buffs, rate of fire increase by 10%, double the elemental effect chance, and also this one as well, move speed to 35%. Foundry can now be dual wielded by Albai, so that when you start the game, you can immediately start dual wielding, and you'll put your first weapon here and your Foundry in your left hand, and you can use two weapons immediately at the start of the game. And now it will match your highest level weapon, not your lowest level weapon. I don't think there's any good reason that the Foundry should match your lowest level weapon. It's almost never used at this point in the game. We should incentivize players probably to use it as much as possible. So making it equal to the highest level weapon means that it's actually usable through the whole course of the game. And that's what we want, all right? And so that's what we should do. This is not, there's no risk involved in balance with this. This would just be a good quality of life change so that your Foundry actually remains relevant. So if you do run out of ammo, your Foundry does some damage. Okay? Thunderstorm, increase the elemental effect chance from 20 to 35% and increase the base damage by 10%. I don't know this weapon very well. I think the biggest problem with this weapon is the inscriptions that can drop on it. But this would make this weapon better. Hell, let's increase the base accuracy. So we're going to reduce that spread just that little bit amount, which is an incredibly important stat on any shotgun, and then increase the base damage by 15%. I think this would get Hell into like A tier. And I think it's like a B tier weapon right now. Illusion is very, very, very powerful. Let's reduce the magazine size from 24 to 20 and set its move speed to minus 10% instead of 0%. So this doesn't affect the damage the illusion does at all. We can still pump out crazy amounts of damage, it just makes it a little harder for us to do that. Porcupine is a little better than I used to think it was, but let's increase its base damage by 10% and its elemental effect get an extra 5%. So now this will be truly one of the best ways to apply elemental effects in the game. Extremely good elemental applicator and fun to use. Pupil, again, I'm not going to reduce the damage this weapon does, but let's reduce its non-charged up accuracy by a significant amount. So if you don't, so normally you've got your circle here, and now it's going to be start here and then zoom in. So as you charge, you have a more drastic increase from start to finish of charging up the pupil. So you have to be really close to people to use it without charging up. And we can reduce its move speed to minus 10%. These don't reduce the damage of the weapon, they just make it harder to do what you were doing before. But if you play smart, and most people are used to using the pupil, you'll still be able to do the crazy damage that you're hoping to do. I think the biggest mistake you can make nerfing these illusion and pupil is to remove their damage, and I don't think you should do that. The biggest problem with most snipers in the game is they don't shoot fast enough to keep up with the number of enemies on the screen. So most of these include a slight rate of fire increase. Bloody Drill, base damage 10%, rate of fire 10%. Golden Bow, projectile sights increased slightly. This thing can be really hard to hit with sometimes. And maybe I'm just bad, so maybe, but that's my personal opinion. And base damage increased by 10%. Ghost Shock, rate of fire increased by 10%. Piercing Flame, rate of fire 10%. Base damage 20%, and slightly increased the projectile size. I think these would be some really nice quality of life, very small buffs to the snipers that would make a big difference. Next up is a little bit of development. I think Bone Dragon is one of the cooler weapons in the game, but isn't quite very good. So I'm suggesting one of the few significant changes to this weapon that I've included in my imaginary patch notes. Elemental effect chance to 30%, magazine size from 2 to 1. Enemies in the center now take crit damage. Crit X increased to 2.0. Can now get crit inscriptions and the crit Gemini inscriptions, and the base damage is increased by 10%. What do you think? Kind of interesting, right? Deafening Mortar, we're just going to straight up reduce the base damage by 20%. This thing does way too much damage. Way too much damage. Frenzied Shark. I have a spicy way to change this weapon that keeps it doing what it's supposed to do. Junkrat players, you are going to love this change, okay? Movement speed from 10% to 20%, 10% increase. Magazine from 6, or it might have been 6 or 8 to 4. So we have a very low magazine size. Rate of fire from 1.5 to 6.5. That's the same rate of fire as Wild Hunt. So you can basically as fast as you can click, it'll shoot. Effect chance to 20%, base damage increased 20%, and base projectile speed increased by 25%. Let that soak in, all right? So just think of what it's going to look like on your screen the first time you get a mag share capacity Gemini, because you can fill the room with bouncing projectiles that actually do some damage, that have a fair chance to apply an elemental effect. You're not moving super slow, and that slight projectile speed increase I think will solve some of the issues with aiming the weapon. I think this would be a very, very, very good spot to put Frenzied Shark in, and makes it do what it's supposed to do. Next up is Justice. Movement speed to 20% from 10%, I think. Magazine size from 6 to 4. This is the same amount that can be detonated at once. So I think that these should be the same. You can detonate 4 shots at once. Your magazine size is 4. Elemental percent chance from 20 to 40%, and base damage increased by 10%. This makes it much better at applying elemental effects and makes it do what it's kind of supposed to do better. This doesn't solve its problems with being hard to shoot bosses and stuff, and I don't think it should. I think it should be bad at that, but that it should be good in other situations, or if you use it correctly. Tiger Cannon. Elemental effect chance increased from 10 to 20%. Rate of fire increased from 1 to 1.25. Base damage increased by 35%, and reload duration reduced from 2.5 to 1.8. I think this makes the Tiger Cannon do what it's supposed to do. Hit big hits, shoot. It has some chance to apply an elemental effect instead of elemental effects just being a downside on it. Keep in mind that every Tiger Cannon you see with an elemental effect is worse. because it only has a 10% chance to apply that elemental effect. And so I would almost always rather have another inscription. Almost always. Fire Dragon is an extremely powerful weapon, and a slight nerf to this would be good. So we're taking it from 10% move speed to 0%, and the reload time from a very long 2.5 to an even longer 3. I think that this would be a good, healthy place for Fire Dragon to be in, and I think Fire Dragon is still very good. I think Laser Gloves is okay as a weapon, but increasing its magazine capacity is a very big buff to this weapon. The reason for that is because this weapon, each time it hits, can stack up to 100 times. But anytime you miss, change enemies, or reload, it resets. So if our magazine capacity is starting out higher, then this thing can scale to a higher amount of damage. At 50, we only ever get halfway through scaling. At 70, we get 70% of the way through scaling. So I think this is a good buff for this weapon without making it too overpowered. Thunderclap Gloves, on the other hand, is what I consider the best weapon in the game. And part of that is because it does AoE damage with a fair chance to apply shock, and it is by far the best miasma applicator in the game, especially if you can get like anything of a variety of things that help you out with applying elemental effects. And so the way we're addressing this is by reducing its rate of fire from 16 rounds per second to 12 rounds per second, because rate of fire directly impacts how effective something is at applying an elemental effect, because it's about number of hits as opposed to anything else. And since that's a 25% rate of fire decrease, we're increasing the base damage by 25%. Overall, this is a nerf to this weapon without actually making it terrible. And last up, we're almost done. This is it. All right. Fire Tower. What I've done over here for swords is change all of their effect chance from 50 to 40%. All right. I don't really like that all of the swords have the highest elemental effect chance. Minus the Poisonous Ghost, and then they get used as just a way to Gemini them for elemental share. I think that like pigeonholes them into something that they really shouldn't be put into. So the elemental effect chance for all of them will be 40, but they're all getting base damage increases to compensate for that change. 20% for the Fire Tower, 15 for Flowing Light, and 15% for the Poisonous Ghost. Also, this will take a little bit of development, but the weapon skill animation for Fire Tower should really happen about twice as fast as it currently does. And the move speed for this is going from 10% to 0%. So overall, this is probably the best performing weapon, and it has gotten like the most balanced sort of changes. Flowing Light, minus 10% elemental effect chance, but 15% base damage increase should be useful. Poisonous Ghost, elemental effect chance increased by 10%, base damage increased by 15%, and weapon skill current HP damage from around 30% current HP to 50% current HP. This should make this weapon on par with the rest of the cast here. All three of these swords would be very powerful with these new changes. They already are on the verge, but especially with some of the changes we've made higher in this patch, I think they'd be really good. So that does it. That is Slight's imaginary patch notes with very little development, all config changes. And I think that we would have a very, very, very interesting game on our hands if a lot of this stuff was implemented. And a lot of this stuff is very easy to implement. It really is. So I will have a link to this below where you can come in, you can sign if you want to. If you think that this would be a good thing for Gunfire Reborn, just click here. You can add your name as a comment, and if you have some other suggestions throughout the thing, then I will look at this periodically and build upon it, and eventually I will send it to the Gunfire developers and see if anything comes of it. I am open to your opinions on every part of this. If there's any, like, if you see a mistake, some bad grammar, or you think something's coming off worse than I want it to, or you think something doesn't make sense, give me all the information that you like. Hopefully this was enjoyable for you, and hopefully you have an excellent day. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thank you.